I'd now like, I'm really pleased now to ask Andrew Harper, who is online and is the special advisor and known to many of you for his fantastic work as the special advisor to the High Commissioner Climate Action in the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. Sorry, I've been standing in the way, that's the problem. And so Andrew's going to kick us off, and then we're going to come back and reflect together on what we want to achieve today and how it's going to work. So, Andrew, I don't know, there's Andrew looking ready to go, and you're now pinned. I'm not sure if that's a good thing. Hello, Andrew, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine, thanks, Harriet. Shall I go ahead?
Go for it, thank you.
Okay, no, thanks, and condolences in terms of the loss of the Queen. Again, it's probably like very much at the end of an era, and it's going to be an increasingly tumultuous and challenging era that we're about to enter. So very timely still that we push forward, because there's no time to waste when we're talking about humanitarian needs and the important place that providing energy to vulnerable populations, or what will be increasingly vulnerable populations. So congrats for still making the decision to move forward on this. I unfortunately have to leave after 30 minutes. And one of the reasons why I'm leaving is that we have our global representatives meeting in Geneva. And so every representative around the world is here. And for the first time, issues of climate, the provision of renewable energy, protection of the environment is really very much on the agenda. We haven't had a meeting with all our global representatives for about 3 years. And 3 years ago, I would say that energy was really not that much of a priority. It was a priority, but it was several layers back. But I think the consequence of and growing realization of the climate emergency, but also that if you cannot protect the environment, then you cannot expect the host communities to protect those people who have been displaced, is now coming to the fore and increasingly realized by our colleagues around the world. And it's quite interesting too, in the discussions that I've been having with many host states, what used to be a relatively minor ministry in the past, and that's the Ministry of Environment, is now very much a key ministry for many governments when they're talking about their strategic positioning, and when they're looking at development funds and how they're going to be moving forward. So the work that you're all doing, and the work that we need to be doing in the future is particularly important at this time. There were a number of questions. I was speaking to Thomas beforehand in terms of what he would like me to focus on. And so he actually sent me a couple of a few questions, which, if you don't mind, I'll use those as the basis. I'll also save you from having a PowerPoint presentation. So he sort of the questions were, what in your perspective is the most important challenge we are facing as the humanitarian energy sector? And I'll almost sort of say, like, that opening question also represents one of the challenges. The humanitarian energy sector needs to be not just a humanitarian energy sector. It needs to be very much part of the development sector. Like we're providing often first response, or we're providing to the most vulnerable populations. But when you're talking about sustainability, humanitarians do not necessarily have a great track record in putting in place sustainable interventions. So we also don't have the time to waste, or the money to waste, by having almost trucking and chucking options. So we need to be ensuring that when we do become engaged in providing energy, it is sustainable, and it does fit into the overall national and community plans that are in existence. So that was the first one, just a question. So even I've got a question about the question. So going into his 5 questions. So the first one was energy and displacement settings is underfunded, but also not efficiently used. Yep, absolutely. But we can't complain about that, because much like the climate never going to be as cool as what it is now, we're probably not going to be as funded as well as we are now per capita, because whether you look at the impact of climate change or poor governance, we've actually seen a retreat on the SDGs. We can only expect and anticipate huge numbers of people to be on the move. Whether you want to talk about climate mobility or human mobility or conflict displacement, it doesn't really matter. You're going to have people who are going to be looking to either find protection, enhance dignity, or a better life elsewhere. So we need to be looking at how do we find more sustainable, impactful, efficient solutions. So yes, the energy and displacement settings is absolutely underfunded, but that should not be a reason why we do not try and do much more, particularly on the development angle. The other issue too is we're actually doing a lot of work in trying to identify where there are linkages between the huge commitments. Almost every day there's another government or fund or foundation or private sector who's saying that they're making commitments in order to address climate change or providing renewable energy or carbon offsets. So I do not believe that there's a lack of money out there, but going to the question that Thomas asked, is current funding in displacement settings underfunded? Absolutely. But I think there is the potential to do a much better job linking that up. And we're actually doing a stock take of all the government's funds and foundations to see how we can do a better job in linking that all in together. And the second one, limited expertise and capacity to plan or implement sustainable energy solutions. Out of the five, this is my biggest issue. It's not necessarily the data. It's not necessarily that energy is not a formal priority. It's not that we displaced people are not part of the national or international energy agendas. It's just that the people who want to make a difference do not have the expertise and capacity to plan or implement sustainable energy solutions. So we need to get those people, those skill sets in those locations where it's most needed. And if we can implement the projects and manage the projects in a way which makes them sustainable and efficient, then I'm confident that we will get more and more support from others who want to make a difference. Whether, again, if you talk to the various funds and foundations and governments, a lot of people want to make a difference, they just don't know how. So we have to be in that position that we're confident, we've got the skill sets, we've also got the ambition and the vision to make that difference. And I know that NORCAP, I saw NORCAP on the list there, or NRC, I saw one of the emblems there. Like they're huge support to UNHCR and other actors. But I also quite understand that they get a bit upset or frustrated because sometimes the advice which may be provided by partners may not necessarily be taken on board by senior management. But this is a culture change that is happening. It's interesting when our High Commissioner provided the presentation to all our reps, the second point after COVID and welcoming people back to face-to-face meetings was he talked about the climate crisis and the need to be providing much more sustainable support, environmentally sensitive support in displacement settings. Like that was a huge decision by the High Commissioner to rank that as after the pandemic as the most important element. Limited and poorly shared data on humanitarian needs and solutions. Yep, it's an issue, but I think if we've got the capacity and expertise in the field and the partnerships with entities who can do a good job, that's super important. Energy is not a formal priority in humanitarian assistance. That's also true. It's not a formal priority, but protection is. And I would say that if you cannot provide renewable, environmentally sensitive energy, then you're not providing effective protection. And you've also got the negative environmental consequences of people seeking other power sources. Displaced people not included in national or international energy access agendas was the fifth or sixth question that Thomas posed to me as being a challenge. Yes, but we're working on that, and I think one of the big successes of the Global Compact on Refugees was to get more development actors on board. And like the High Commissioner, apart from having me as a climate advisor, he's got someone who's much smarter, who's his development advisor, and that is providing linkages with the World Bank. We've got the World Bank Joint Data Center in Copenhagen, but we're doing a lot of work now with the IFC and the African Development Bank and the Asian Development Bank. And we need to be linking up with these entities in order that displaced people are included in the national, international energy access agendas. But host governments will only agree to that if they do see that we're providing something to the table. If we go and sort of say, look, we want without actually contributing, they're just going to get increasingly upset and sort of say, well, like, we've supported you long enough. So it's really critical for us to demonstrate short-term impact engagement, but very much linked into longer-term development initiatives to change the and revitalize and to ensure there's renewable energy being provided across the board. So bottom line is, out of all those elements, a lack of capacity and expertise is probably our biggest limiting factor. And when I go to meet with our Southern African reps just straight after this, they'll be saying we don't have the capacity. So it will be the biggest issue that I'll be trying to push. The other challenge that we've got when we do have the generous support of our partners is that there's always this call for mainstreaming. And I think I saw somewhere in so humanitarian energy mainstreaming. Our offices just don't have the capacity to mainstream. And so we've probably got to look at a different way of working where you do have standalone technical expertise, which is aligned to the key agencies, but where we cannot basically mainstream those positions because we cannot expect the funding to continue to grow as it has been. And so how do we almost create specialist units that can be there for more than 1 or 2 years to help achieve the objectives? But that's something which we can talk about a bit later. What is UNHCR working on to mitigate challenges faced on the ground? Being in this meeting is one of those. Talking to Thomas's team and GPA, having the clean energy challenge in order to raise the ambition, working with development actors to see how we can incorporate displacement energy needs into larger term development settings. We've also, I'm not too sure whether USAID or Power Africa is in your meeting, but meeting with possibly new partners on how we can also provide much more support. And we probably can't discount the elephant in the room, some of the fossil fuel companies as well, about how can we enhance or facilitate or encourage their transition from big bad fossil fuels to something which is much more renewable. Because like when you start looking at, if you actually want to start providing, let's say, a distribution network in Africa, it's not going to be UNHCR or GPA or UNDP or anyone else who's going to be able to have that distribution network. We've got to be looking at entities who have got huge coverage, and that is going to be the private sector. And when you do look at that, and you look at, for instance, I think Total has got something like 14,000 distribution points in Africa. We can't discount them in terms of potential collaboration in the future. I'm not sort of saying we get rid of all our values and ethics and morals, but we need to figure out how we can be as pragmatic as possible. Then the last question that Thomas asked me was, what would be your ask for energy experts in the room? How can we get energy experts on the ground to make that real difference in terms of looking at plans, having a much more strategic approach rather than just putting in photovoltaic cells? How do we ensure that these displacement settings have a linkage to the National Development Plan, have a linkage to the National Adaptation Plan, and what are the potential partnerships that we can be having with the private sector in these areas. There's also no doubt that given the current change in the geopolitics at the moment and the impact of the increase in energy prices also makes some of the earlier decisions need to be revisited. And I was talking to our rep from Bangladesh yesterday, and you probably know that we fully supported the implementation and the provision of LPG gas in order to mitigate the impact on deforestation around Kutupalong in Bangladesh, something which I fully support. But that may not be a long-term solution if we can no longer afford to keep fronting up the costs for the LPG. So these transitions, I think we need to be as pragmatic as possible as we move forward. But I think I went much longer than what I was planning to. But time is of the essence. I was just doing a calculation just before we came on in terms of the cost to the environment and the amount of biofuel that every displaced person, every refugee uses is I know open for discussion. Sometimes it's about 1.9 kilos, sometimes it's 1. So I put it at 1.1 kilos per day per person. And just using that figure for let's say at least a million refugees in Uganda, that's 400,000 tons of biofuel per year of biomass. So it's a 400,000 tons of deforestation is huge. So we cannot expect, I wouldn't expect governments to continue to be as generous as they have been in displacement settings if they're basically relinquishing their future environment, where they've mortgaged the environment, they've basically provided generous support, and we're failing them. Like we're failing them in almost every country. So what can we do to be an honest partner for these host communities? And so this is why I think impact action at scale, which is sustainable, is super important. So on that point, I will say thanks, Harriet. I've still got a few minutes if there's any particular questions that you would like to raise. Over.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and that's particularly for ending on that note of really how time flies when you're in a climate crisis and a conflict crisis and a refugee crisis, and we absolutely have to pick up the pace. And that's the challenge for today that we're going to be wrestling with. Well, it's not the challenge just for today, but that is what we want to focus on today. Are you stretching your hand, Owen, or did you want to ask a question? Could you introduce yourself for those people online in particular, please?
Yeah, hi, I'm Owen Grapham. I'm the Assistant Director of Chatham House's Environment and Society Programme. Thanks, Andrew. Really great. I guess the way you ended with the discussion of kind of deforestation issues, I guess I was interested in your feelings about how we as a group should be positioning ourselves in advance of COP. I mean, I think, yeah, where you've ended is an interesting kind of segue, but maybe you have further feelings about, yeah, how we should be positioning ourselves in those discussions. Yeah,
I'll probably so I've got a few more minutes to go, so it'll probably it'll be quick and to the point. Is this under Chatham House rules, by the way?
Chatham House's partner, of course it is.
Well,
go for it, Andrew. Oh, we're going to get the golf now.
There's a potential that there's a train wreck coming in the near future, and as far as large gatherings are concerned in Sharm el Sheikh, one of the big issues is on loss and damage, and whether the G77 plus states will be able to come to an agreement with let's say the OECD states or some of the northern states. That's just not going to happen. I'm like, if you look at the follow up, the Glasgow process, the meetings in Bonn, as far as I'm aware, they were a disaster. And so we haven't gone too much further than where we were in Glasgow. We've actually probably gone further. We've gone behind than we were in Glasgow. So going to COP, If I was a refugee hosting state, or if I was part of the G77, and I'm saying, look, like I'm hosting 1 million refugees, and since Glasgow, we've they probably won't say this because they've not done the calculations, but we've lost 400,000 tons by demonstrating our international burden sharing or international commitments. And the richer states are still not moving forward on almost any front. So it basically then becomes a lack of trust, a lack of collaboration, a lack of a challenge to multilateralism. And we're seeing it more and more. There's almost this dysfunctional disparity between the West going to Africa and saying, look, like, can we diversify our fuel and our funding, our fuel requirements? But at the same time, there's this almost sense of complete disrespect for many of these, well, I'm using Africa at the moment, for what they're doing and the challenges that they're facing, particularly being on the overused cliche of the front lines of the climate emergency. So coming into COP, I would be pushing as much as possible in the loss and damage to sort of say, look, it's not just loss and damage in terms of being impacted by the climate emergency, but these countries have probably have to look for a different term, but they're also providing a service, an international service. So it's international service plus loss and damage. The international service is by, whether it be through their equivalent of carbon capture through their forests and through their agriculture, but also by hosting displaced populations. So they deserve to be supported irrespective of the loss and damage issue. Trying to avoid the politics, though, because I'm part of the United Nations, so I should try and avoid the politics. We did have a win in terms of a side event, which has been accepted, which is to support the presence of refugees or displaced persons at COP. So I dare say that's what I'm going to focus on now, is to try and bring the voices of people who are actually being impacted so they can represent themselves, not that we go there and sort of say, look, I'm from the UNHCR, I'd like to talk about the displaced. I think the best people to talk about the displaced are those people who are actually being displaced. So so that will be my focus, to bring people who can articulate what climate change means, what also a lack of access to energy means, because it's not just cutting energy, it's also obviously how do we empower people, how do we provide energy to populations so that they see that they have a future. But on that note, I better go before I get into it.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew. I can tell you now, everyone in the room was nodding and supporting that focus on enabling refugees to be at COP27 and to put the case for access to energy, including in displaced settings. So thank you very much for responding so eloquently to the 5 questions. I'm very worried. Never accept an invitation to speak in comment, clearly. Thank you very, very much.
Okay, all the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And we will now crack on with the meat of the day. I think Andrew's laid out very beautifully for us the scale of the challenge that we face. And I guess at Ashton, we for 20 years have been spotlighting those frontline innovators, telling their stories, and from that then pushing for the bigger policy or programmatic changes that we need to see. But we know, when we did go to the Lures, you'll see there are very big mirrors, and when you look in that mirror, we know we're not having enough impact. We know we're not. And if we were ever in any doubt, I have to really congratulate GPA and UNITAR on this fantastic report that we're going to be discussing later today, that lays out in stark detail where we're not up to the challenge, and also the opportunities and the ways in which we can change how we work so that we do begin to respond adequately to meet the needs of those displaced people. We reckon that's about 1 in 8 of the people who don't have access to clean energy are people displaced or refugees. And so we know we have to start to think and work differently. And some of what we think that's about at Ashton is, in one way, to work much more closely with displaced communities themselves. It's communities who really do live in the last mile away from power, including the most marginalized, in telling their stories and showcasing the innovations that they are driving forward. And I thought that was what Andrew said, we can't go on and on. I think we should go on asking for more money. And we need to show how with that money we can drive change. And amazing organizations like Kakuma Ventures, who've been shortlisted for an Ashton Award, started by Innocent Chilombo himself, studying in DR Congo, has to flee, ends up in the refugee camp Kakuma in Kenya, and wants to continue his studies and really struggles to access the internet because they don't have power. And so he then, based on his own experience, starts Kakuma Ventures, seeking to bring renewable energy so that communities can have access to power, which will enable them whether to study, whether to work. These are brilliant organizations with humming with solutions that we all need to get behind and back. It isn't always about big slabs of money. It's actually about making sure that the money really flows out. So that's one strand. And the other strand is that we do need to shift the overarching architecture. I was really pleased, Owen, that you brought up that question of COP27. And we are pulling together a coalition that I hope many of you will join to push the case at COP27 that clean power is a must. And clean power is a must, including for people who have been displaced, and really help pushing forward the need. We're saying roughly 10% of adaptation funds should be flowing into access to energy. So we're not just talking about powering down dirty fossil fuels, we're also talking about powering up the renewables that people need because they don't have access to energy. And I think that begins to address some of the points that Andrew was talking about rebuilding trust by shifting the agenda to the priorities of some of the developing countries, and in particular Africa. So that's sort of one of the responses. And the other is we're really so pleased to be working with all of you to think, what are those big innovative shifts that we need to take, particularly for energy access in displaced communities. And as Andrew said, we're perhaps all working in our silos, and people who work on energy access don't think about refugees enough. And it's sort of thinking, how do we break out of that? What are the big radical steps that we can make that respond to the challenges from people who are tired of seeing same old, same old? How can we really crack the code and work differently? And that's the challenge that we're facing today, and that we really look forward to working with all of you on. And now Thomas is going to outline a little bit more about that. Or perhaps he's got the answers.
Of course I have. Yeah, thanks for this introduction. I'm not sure if anyone in this room doesn't know me, but my name is Thomas. I'm part of the GPA team, and we actually have the pleasure to hold this entire workshop today with Ashton, with GPA, and also with our friends from the GRN, from the Global Refugee Network. As Harriet eloquently already sort of outlined what we are planning to do, let me go a little more into details. Can we pull up the agenda? We had to switch the opening a little bit because of Andrew's commitments. So everything is a little bit, work in progress, but we make it. First of all, we do not want to reinvent the wheel here in this workshop, right? The main purpose of this workshop is we would like to learn from the tea partners. We would like to learn from them, and we would also like to suggest any kind of knowledge exchange towards tea partners, because in the future, and we are really glad and humble about this, we will become part of the wider team program. We had a fantastic workshop yesterday, and I think I counted 18, is it right, Angus? 18 partners that are sort of forming the core tea program.
No, I haven't counted, sorry.
I did. It was heavy, it was intense, but it was also extremely rich, and I have 2 pages of follow-ups with tea partners where I can already see synergies and ways to discuss, organize a workshop, organize a webinar, exchange, and so on. So for us, it's really a two-way street here. We would like to learn from tea partners, and we would like to also give our knowledge, our information about displacement settings to the wider tea partnership. So what we're planning in the morning is we have this opening as we already doing. Then we have a panel discussion with fantastic people. And then we have a longer lunch because we thought it's also very important for us to have a bit of time to really discuss over lunch and over coffee the nuts and bolts of what we are planning to do. And then in the afternoon, we have the real meat of the workshop where we go into breakout rooms and really discuss the topics among 4 key themes. And then we will close it around 4 o'clock and have time for a drink as well. Okay. Shada, can I invite you to come up on stage, and then if you could first of all introduce the GRN, and then we walk through some of the content already.
Okay. Hello. Good morning, everyone. My name is Shaza. I am a Syrian refugee based in Germany. We are in the GRN, Global Refugee-Led Network. Just after we would say GRN easier. So we are a group of refugee-led organization came all together. We have seen that there is many problems are happening here and there, and no one from the people who is affected are there in the decision making, and we are just the recipient, and then no one asks us what we need and what we have to achieve. So that's why we came all together. We almost around more than 300 RLOs. We have our website. We can share all this information afterwards. We have our membership. We came all together to have some summits. We have the global summit, first ever in Geneva, done and designed by refugees and for refugees. Then we have our like regional summits, as we are in 6 regions, Africa, America, MENA, Asia Pacific, and Europe, and Latin America. And we are trying to bring and to provide more advice and policies to the decision makers. And we are believe that meaningful refugee participation or meaningful participation is the key to solve all of these problems, including the energy and the climate change and so on. So I'm happy to be with you today. And yeah, I'm really thanking all of you, because I see now the shift. If I can compare that to when we met before, that now there is insisting and there is like a call to include the affected community, because actually, if you look deeper, you see that nothing will be happened if you are not including the people who are working for them. So they have to have a say on their lives, not us. So yeah, I'm happy to share that with you today, with my experience and our experience, and happy for the partner as well, because also if we refer to the SDGs, there is a goal 7 and goal 17 where we match a lot with our work, like goal 7 that have affordable green energy for all, including displacement people, and 17 about partnership, which is what we are here, and we thanks the GPA for our partnership that really work in a meaningful way.
Okay.
I should speak a little bit about
Exactly.
how the numbers, because we have to check ourselves by these numbers. It's really checking, it's alarming. If you see, like I remember last year, it was around 80 million refugees or displaced persons. Now you can see only in 1 year, like it's more than 1.2 million refugee or displaced persons. If you go and look, like there is internally displaced people also, like around like 40 something. And also there is stateless people. We sometimes don't think about the number, the huge number of stateless people who has no say. There is nothing, no rights for them. And if we look, finally, Syria had a record. Yeah, but when? In displacement and refugees. We are the one who is providing more and more refugees and internally displaced people. And we can see Venezuela, for example. Look at how this numbers is really alarming us, that there is a problems. And unfortunately, we are bringing more and more. We are still now have Ukrainian, maybe it will be more than Syrian nowadays as a numbers. So actually the wars is continue to come. We have Pakistani now. There is a lot of IDPs. We don't need to forget about this climate change. Now it's a real. Now it's a real, there is no, like just, we thought we will have a problem. No, we have a problems now. So I think these numbers is giving us an alarm, just knocking us like, come on, God, we need to start working on that. This number is getting more bigger, and how we can stop this.
If I may add here, when we talk about, I felt it was good from Andrew to also point out the environmental challenges that these numbers bring to the host community as well, right?
Yeah.
So we are talking about an even more and larger number when it comes to energy in this regard.
Exactly, because also like misusing resources and out of sudden in one place. And like this war affecting our resources, like look at our Syria is damaged, for example. There is no field nowadays. There is no green, nothing. It's, yeah, as you said, it's like actually it's dialectic problems, if you can say, like everything affecting everything. So it's not an end, it's a circle, if we can say. So we have to stand and stop these things if we can, if we believe, and I think we are that we need to do something. Here, like I'm thanking the Chatham House for this kind of records, because also academia is really important. We need to know the numbers, we need data, then we can understand how to have a strategy to achieve what we need. If we look here, we see that we need to have the SGDs with displacement people. It's a must. And also we have like 94% of forcibly displaced people in the camps has nothing, you know, they have no power. And here in these two statistics, we can see from 77% in 2014, we have 81, like we increased the number. Actually, there is nothing positive if we can look at it. And regarding to, this is the clean cooking. If we go to the sustainable electricity, we will see like 89% in 2014. Now it's 84% in 2020. So these numbers also again shows that there is a need to act now. It's no time to delay that. Sustainable energy access rates are not keeping back with the rate of displacement, actually. So that's why I think all of us is today to do something, to achieve something before the COP 17. It's coming in November, I think. So actually, no, I'm just like, you can have a look because already Andrew comments on this. This is the challenges, and here is what we can like focus as a refugee for us or as displacement people. This is two that never like being taken in mind and in consideration when they are having our strategy or having our plan. So this is what we need to do, changing the approach itself. We are not the only expert. I think we need to go bottom up. This is how we can do and achieve our goals. And as we said again and again, I think the will is here. The question was from Andrew is how we can give you how. We know how, because when you come to the people who is affected, they know what they need. Then they will let you know. And then maybe with the co-designing, co-implementing, co-evaluating, we can achieve what we need, all of us. And I'm always having an example. You cannot go to the doctor because he's a doctor. He will say, oh, stop, don't say anything. I know, maybe you have headache and you have to have aspirin. No, who said? Maybe I have a back. I don't know. You are expert, yes, but you need to listen to me first, right? And then you can give me what you want, but you cannot just assume that you know better than me because you are like doctor or whatever. So this is how I think we need to think about our new approach, working all together. One hand is not clapping alone. And yeah, as a community, affected community, we are here to support you and us all together on this globe. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, also Yes, I like this with two hands, right? With one hand you can't clap. Just to give you also a little bit an overview for those who are not so familiar with the humanitarian space, who is actually owning and who is governing energy in displacement settings. And to be honest, it's a bunch of different organizations and various partners. So if you go from left to right, the humanitarian agencies, as you heard from Andrew, they are I would say the managers of these camp situations, of these displacement situations. As you heard also, there is not enough expertise from their side. They are logistic experts. They are really, really good in providing enormous amount of food and water and shelter for 100,000 people in no time, but they're not really, really good in terms of long-term and sustainable energy solutions, for example. So control and access is probably one of their sort of key topics here, key activities. Then we have a couple of international bodies. Many of them are part of the GPA steering group, actually in fact all of them who are in here. They have part of the role, they're part of the solutions as well. For example, UNEP also have a massive energy team who are working with us and supporting us as well. So we do gain a lot of expertise and skills from their side. Then we have, and probably one of the most important and critical partners are the implementing partners on the ground. And as you can see, it's just a very tiny example of NGOs working in this space. Just to highlight NOCAP and NRC, these are the largest energy expert providers. They actually deploy experts in the field and many more experts, for example, than UNHCR and IOM have together on their payroll. So it's one of our prime partners. And in fact, 2.5 positions also within the GPA team are seconded by NOCAP, provided by NOCAP. Then it was also already mentioned, we have research organizations, and I'm glad to have Chatham House here in the room, working with us since many, many years, being an essential part of the GPA, of the establishment of the GPA. But also since a couple of years, we are working very closely with Max, Loughborough University, also a very, very important partner, and just to name here a few. And then obviously we have the donors on the other side. So the core funding for the GPA is currently provided by the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. NORAD, as I mentioned, or NOCAP, as I mentioned earlier, is sponsored by NORAD, so the development side of the Norwegian ministries. We have IKEA Foundation, they were in the workshop yesterday, also a very essential part, and they provide the funding for the largest, which used to be the largest standalone energy program, RFR, together with Practical Action and other partners. So they obviously play an enormous role, and recently, or not recently actually, since also a couple of years, the German government is very active in the space. So these are, let's say, the top 3 donors, but they also see that they have the Danish NFA, so there are many others who are stepping up and providing funding and also expertise sometimes. So we do see a shift here as well from the donor community. However, what is always clear, and they repeat this quite often, they do not want to use humanitarian funding for example, solar installations. So they really struggle to justify not spending money for food and water and shelter, but for energy installations, which is very understandable from their side. Next slide, please. Already presented this yesterday, so apologies for those who were in the room already. So this is the overall structure of the GPA. We are representing the coordination unit, the spider in the middle of the web somehow, and we are running a couple of task forces, for example, on cooking, on e-waste, on innovative finance solutions, so many other topics that are relevant, where we need new solutions, new technologies, new delivery models, and so on. We also have a field-based practitioners network. It's a group of experts that meet every month to discuss recent developments, issues in the field, and yeah, basically exchange very practically on certain issues. And then, very importantly, we have our steering group. And the steering group consists of humanitarian organizations and development organizations, such as, I mentioned already the humanitarians, but on the development side, it is, for example, GIZ, it is Practical Action, it is Sustainable Energy for All, and others. And then we, based on these 5 challenges, we have our 5 working areas, and I don't think I need to go into these details. Just to mention, we also have, and we mentioned it already, the Clean Energy Challenge, which was founded in 2019, and is a mechanism which we're running together with UNHCR to bring additional partners in. Difficult to see the logos, but here you can see also private sector partners, other academia partners, and additional donors as well, being part of the Clean Energy Challenge. Actually, one field is missing, which we are currently developing, is a decarbonizing humanitarian energy fund. So we will have this fund set up soon, hopefully, by the end of the year, which will provide us the possibility to actually implement actions on the ground. So we will have funding to decarbonize existing energy infrastructure, probably in 5 countries in the Sahel region. So there will be a big push coming up with this. Next slide, please. Who supplies energy? And also coming back to Andrew's interventions, we will see these 3 partners who are really on the supply side here. Obviously, the host governments, they need support. Right? We saw the numbers. They have a hard time to match the energy needs of their own population, let alone any kind of displaced situations. So that is really one of our sort of prime partners and prime clients we need to work with. Then we have the humanitarian agencies. Since, for example, I showed the picture yesterday, since a couple of years, at least in what they call the non-food items, they included a solar lantern. So at least they have some kind of torch at night. So I think that is, Owen, do you know since when? Probably 5 years, something like this. It's a standard equipment, but then that's it. So there's nothing else. I mean, with some of these solar lanterns, you can charge your phone, but there's no kind of proper electricity supply whatsoever. And then obviously that is usually run through these implementing partners. You can see them here. And here they also, the 2 of them also running obviously their own generator fleet. I mentioned the number yesterday, 11,000, just with the 5 big UN organizations. But these generators usually only power services, for example, a health post, a water pumping station, and so on. Next. Who pays? Always the question, right? Follow the money. Obviously, for their own staff compounds, for their own generators, the UN and the implementing partners pays for energy. But we also know that displaced people pay for energy. They pay for kerosene, they pay for candles, they pay for firewood, most importantly. And this is really for us, in a way, also the hook, because whenever someone pays for energy already, we can develop a model how we can switch and support this person or this organization to switch from dirty fuel of energy or dirty sources of energy into more sustainable and cleaner sources. So this is really, for example, also the basis of our work about decarbonization, and we will talk about this later on. I don't think I want to go into the numbers in the interest of time. You can always have a look later. The final slide, evidence. We talked about data already, and we have if I may say, data nerds here in the room, with all respect. So if you want to ask any questions about data, go to Sarah and Phil and Owen. So we mentioned already, there's a clear lack of data, and the numbers we showed, you can ask Owen how they are modeled. They're based on a model. It's a very solid model. It's the best we have, no question, but it's not accurate data. We do not have data from every camp, for example, or from every country. And this is a problem when we actually talk about monitoring in the future. The displaced people are not, I guess they're not part of the monitoring of SDG 7. So the numbers we heard yesterday from, for example, from ESMAP, may not include displaced people. So the 700 million people who do not have access to electricity might be actually more. So they might not include displaced people because the numbers are coming from national statistics, and they may not include displaced people because they do not know that the people are living in these countries and so on. So there's clearly a lack of data which we as a sector need to address, and where we need help from all kinds of partners to actually gain a proper basis at one point. Developing a global baseline, and then we're using this baseline as a monitoring tool in the future to actually measure progress in our work and so on. We already talked about climate action. This is also part of the first scoping phase, which we are now in until the end of the year. As part of our deliverables, we want to use COP27 to promote this topic, to bring our partners from GRN into Sharm el-Sheikh. We see progress here as well. We see much more interest from organizations. For example, the first one is ICRC and others. This is about the generator, but ICRC also have issued a charter, environmental and climate charter on humanitarian situations. I will actually go to a retreat with the German government in 2 weeks, where we'll also talk about greening humanitarian activities, introducing the climate topic into the humanitarian space, and so on. So there is much more interest. The generator topic is one crucial element. It's the low-hanging fruit we can all change immediately, or the humanitarian partners can change immediately. But obviously, when Andrew is talking about 400,000 tons of firewood in Uganda alone, this is not something we can solve overnight, right? This is a much, much bigger problem. And this is where we need also climate partner and environment partner to support us here. I think in the interest of time, I would leave it here. And that was the last slide, yes. Good. I think we have a break now, 10 minutes. We need to prepare the ground for the panel discussion, and come back in 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Report. Now it's official. This report, this MEI report from 2015, really changed the sector and actually formed the sector, I think. And certainly Owen was one of the key figures behind. So really happy to have Owen on the call, in the meeting. And Owen, as a first question, could you elaborate a little bit more what the data topic is, where these numbers are coming from, and basically where we left it in the last presentation?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Thomas. Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's really nice to be here and nice to talk on my favorite subject. Yeah. I mean, Shaza and Thomas have already, they've done part of my presentation for me. They showed you the big picture numbers that Chatham House came up with. Yeah. So back in 2015, when myself and Gleda over here were working on this subject, we were kind of challenged with thinking about how much energy are displaced people using, and yeah, so effectively we put this challenge to ourselves: can we come up with a global number, and how do you actually go about doing that? Well, in our case, we just started talking to people working in the camps in across the world. And we had a nice relationship with UNHCR, with NRC. There were probably about 25 or 30 energy and environmental officers out there around the world. And essentially we had long and detailed conversations with them where we started trying to project how much energy people were using in different settings, looking primarily at cooking and lighting, and trying to get the best estimates that we possibly can of the types of fuels they were using, the amounts they were using, and what they were paying for it. And slowly but surely, we kind of cobbled together this global database, this global model, and together with much smarter and better mathematical people than myself, we turned that into a big model that we felt could make some sensible projections. And yeah, so back in 2015, we said, what was it? Look at my numbers. 89% of people in camps with no access to electricity and 77% with no access to clean cooking solutions. Yeah, and I guess, you know, we can talk a lot about exactly how those numbers were formed. Maybe, I don't know if you
Probably not.
Okay, yeah. Want to go into detail. But yeah, I mean, I guess the point is that what we see is this huge deprivation. I mean, we're not talking about a minor issue here. We're talking about nearly everyone in camps not having access to crucial energy that they need to live dignified lives. And then, yeah, fast forward 7 years, and as we were in the run-up to the SE4All Forum in Kigali, we thought it was time we tried to run these numbers again. So we effectively did the same process. We now, obviously, we have much better networks. There's more energy environmental people out there. They have better information at their hands about what people are using. So we did the same type of thing. We did the kind of interviews with camp officers. We used the projects that are on the ground to give us more detailed knowledge. We fed that into our global model. And yeah, what do we find out? I guess we find out that the picture is less good than it was 7 years ago. So that's, I mean, you've already said it, but that's not actually a reflection of there being less energy and environmental projects. There's more funding, there's more projects, there's more effort, there's more people who know stuff. But of course, the number of people who are in our model has almost doubled between 2015 and 2022. So what this is about energy and environmental projects not keeping pace with the numbers of people that are becoming displaced. Yeah, maybe I'll stop there with my first answer.
And what are the limitations? What is we don't know coming from these numbers?
Yeah, I mean, you've hinted it already, but Gleda and myself would be the first people to say these are not precise numbers. I mean, we've had to do a lot of estimation. We've had to do a lot of extrapolation, and you know, as you say, in some cases we have excellent projects on the ground that can give us very specific numbers about access to cooking, access to electricity. But more often than not, we're having to, for example, extrapolate by saying what we know in one camp applies in another camp nearby, or what we know in one country applies to the country next door, because we simply have no information about that country. And therefore, you know, on a kind of global level, there's huge amounts we need to do to improve that preciseness of that picture. Other limitations, our model is heavily or is much more precise in its camp estimations than in its non-camp estimations. In a way, that's a kind of I guess that mirrors a tendency within our whole world to think about displaced people as camp-based, when actually, of course, Shaza and GRM will tell you very strongly that actually that's not the case for the majority of displaced people. And yeah, we certainly need to improve or get a better understanding of those outside camps and their energy usage in different countries around the world. So many limitations. Those two are the first two that spring to mind.
And what would it take to develop a more solid number also in non-displaced, non-camp situations?
Yeah, it's a tricky challenge because, of course, many people are out of camps because they want to be under the radar. Actually, that in some ways that there is some set of reasons which make it better for them to be out of a kind of administratively controlled area than not.
Or
So
with relatives or whatever the
yeah,
reason
exactly.
is, right?
Yeah. Access to jobs, access to money, access to So adjusting that is very tricky and requires policies and processes at a national level that are more refugee focused and more refugee friendly, displacement focused and displacement friendly. So that's a challenge. But I guess also as a kind of humanitarian sector, we need to be better at recognizing the displaced people in urban environments, and trying to capture that information. I mean, I don't know about all of you guys, but it's quite often when I'm thinking about constructing projects in this space, you start from the perspective of what camps are we going to work in. That's problematic in and of itself. You know, okay, let's not go to Kakuma and all of the kind of usual places where these projects start. We actually need to think, if we took a step back, we could think, well, actually, what settlements are we going to work in? What countries are we going to work in? Yeah.
On this note, Shaza, what is the how is the GRN structured? Are your partner organizations are more in camps or also in these urban settings, rural settings, wherever the displaced people are?
No, actually, we are as a GRN, we are working as an umbrella, if we can say, for the 6 regions. So each region has their settings. They are working with all RLOs. There is some RLOs working in urban.
Can you explain RLO?
Okay, sorry. Refugee-led organization, or RLO, RLI, which is initiatives. So in general, we are working with those groups, and that's why I'm really echo and you are that. In the camp, it's easier for everyone. That's why you can have numbers and all the image is about camping. But actually people outside the camp, they just like integrated within the community. So no one knows about them. What we are doing in GRN, we are trying to help by mapping, if we can say. I am in Bamberg, for example. Maybe I have connecting to refugees in Bamberg. It's easier for me to have numbers, to have data more than even the government itself. Because again, as refugees, not always, I like what you said, like displacement friend to displacement. I will not share that much for someone from the government or someone from different. So I will not be honest. I will try to please him, or I'll try, this is how we do. So I think it's so easy for anyone to go to the camps, but the more huge amount of refugees or displaced people is outside in the urban. And this is how our role is important, because it's not only, everyone can go and take numbers of the camps. It's harder to take numbers of urban setting, if we can say. So this is how our approach is. We are trying from time to time to do mapping, asking who is working, how much the numbers, what is the needs, what is the problems, and bring back this all to the recommendation, if we can say.
And from the discussions we have with your partner organizations, where is energy on the priority list, sort of?
Actually, the energy is not that much clear, because refugees, whoever in the camp or outside the camp, they have more important things than energy or caring about kind of energy, for example. So they need their benefits. So if the clean energy is the solution for them and it's affordable, they will care about it. But if it's not, which is the case so far, Like my family would like to have a solar system there at home because there is no electricity in Syria, for example. I try to support in that, but even me, it's like 2,000 euro. I cannot afford that, to be honest. So they are trying to use whatever the available resources there. This is one. The second one, I saw it while we were in Uganda, for example. The community are willing to use the green energy for cooking and so on. But when we look at the equipments that there, it's really made by, I'm sorry to say, but made by maybe white persons, white male even, to be honest, because one bottle, like one liter, no woman, whoever know cooking or not, will cook anything for a family with this one, which takes long time and it's not fit because, however, she will spend a whole day, for example, to do that. And it's like that the cheapest number I saw is 600 euro or dollar. They got 4 euros per month as assistant. So how come you thought that this is affordable for people? So the community are willing, but it's not fit their needs actually. So this is where I feel like it's really important to include them by even co-design. Like if you want to do green like cooking, bring women, bring displaced people who are using that to say like this one works, this not works. So then you will have something solid. Otherwise, like all this efforts is just wasting resources and wasting time, if you can say.
If I can bring Giles in, because Ashton, for those of you who are not familiar with the organization, is organizing the award every year. Yeah. And since a couple of years also one on humanitarian energy. And this is, I think, speaks very much to what your selection criteria is, I think, from the award itself, right? So what I really like about the award is it's very bottom up. You have a talent to find fantastic projects on the ground, which otherwise would never get this attention to the wider community. So how does it resonate with you, what Chaz just said?
Yeah, okay. So it's great to be sitting next to you, and it's great to be hearing from you because it really resonates a lot. So coming back to your slide, Dr. Thomas, who is providing energy? And you outlined governments, humanitarian agencies, and implementing partners. And I think what I would really like to encourage the discussion in this room, and with this group in particular from the energy access community, is that there is a fourth group, and that's displaced peoples themselves with entrepreneurial passion, skills, and talents that can be brought to this really, really crucial issue. So I would definitely add that fourth character on on the slide. And then as well, actually furthering the discussion, you talked about who pays and you talked about displaced peoples. But I would add that if we're talking about enterprise in these admittedly extremely difficult markets, I would want to bring in a discussion around private capital as well. And that is a broad spectrum from philanthropy right the way through to sort of commercial interests. But yes, from Ashton's point of view, so we run these awards. We do it, the awards are the front end of what we do, if you like, because we feel that the awards can put a spotlight on an issue and then crowd people in by inspiring people around them and telling them something they didn't already know. We can bring people to an issue, and they may be policymakers, they may be financiers, they may be refugees and displaced peoples. But the point is, good storytelling can really crowd people in. And then increasingly, we're doing more and more of working to scale the initiatives that we find, and then learn from them and take that learning up into policy making, and be that pure policy making or be that work with financiers and others. But the whole point is then to build some momentum behind an issue. So we've been working in energy access, as Harriet said, for 20 years, and more recently been working with GPA and Chatham House and others in the humanitarian space, because there is a need right now to shine a spotlight on this issue of humanitarian energy in sustainable terms. So why do we really feel we want to highlight the enterprise part? Well, for us, it's because we think that solutions could be more long-term and sustainable when, to Shaz's point, you ask the displaced peoples themselves, they know what their energy needs are, and then perhaps how they want to deliver it. And so our criteria when we look at our awards reflect the world we want, And part of that, we can talk about them, we would talk about them like it would involve displaced peoples in participating in the decisions of the power that they want. What's the nature of it in co-design and implementation? We would want to see people directly benefiting from the implementation of that power, not simply having a light, but how do you make it productive? Can they economically benefit from the model itself? So is there a way of co-owning or equity provision and this kind of thing? Because that's powerful when you put those sort of tools in people's hands. That can be amazing. And then there's the developing the technical skills and the capacity, etc., to deliver more, to become sales agents, to become technical, to do the M&O maintenance and operations. So I think a lot of the discussion has focused around humanitarian agencies themselves. And we also think, by the way, we're absolutely 100% that displaced people should be involved in those operations too. So there should be a gathering and use of those skills. But I guess we've been thinking mostly about enterprises. And Harriet outlined Kakuma Ventures. And I think we've got a slide or two. I just thought I'd bring some of this to life for you. Perhaps repeating a little bit of what Harriet said. But I wanted to show you a little bit about what it looks like. So Kakuma Ventures, established by Innocent Chilombo, whose wife Joelle Hangi is joined this call. So hello, Joelle. You're online. An amazing organization. So Innocent, a refugee from DRC, fled to Kenya, and he got a job with the IRC, which gave him access. So this is Innocent in the bottom left here. Got a job with the IRC, which gave him access both to energy, but also to the internet, where almost no one in Kakuma at that time had either of those enabling things. We've gone to the next slide. So this is Kakuma. You'll see this is Kakuma Ventures actual offices, and this is Kuzat Konstanza, who works there. And the organization really built up. Innocent himself realized when working at IRC, he was doing sort of downloading tutorials on digital literacy, and in the process actually, and both the diploma but also a master's degree, entirely working online. And he really put it down, he put his future success down to the fact that it was the enabling power of being connected and having energy that allowed him to really take this forward and bring Kakuma Ventures to the fore. So Microsoft, through a connection through UNHCR, sponsored a digital literacy campaign in the camp that became, if you like, the platform for Kakuma Ventures itself. And then if we go to the next slide, Kakuma Ventures now is this amazing platform for entrepreneurial activity. So it invites in partners like Maureen here to sell the platform, to replicate it in other parts of the Kakuma camp, to allow access around her neighborhood within the camp, and then to create a profit that would allow her to buy the solar and the Wi-Fi system. Right, so this really is like, positive feedback loops, which are amazing. So there are 15 entrepreneurs like Maureen now, partnering with Kakuma Ventures. They've connected 1,500 people since 2020, in a couple of years. 200 freelancers, 800 entrepreneurs, livelihoods have been improved. 420 students. I think we go on. So another slide in a second, but it's enabling students to participate, to grow, and to start their own enterprises, and then power enterprises like the Mentias that you saw a second ago there. She's got a shop which is more productive because she can connect to suppliers and distributors and this kind of thing. So yeah, today is a really interesting discussion. It's great to have people from the energy access community in the room, because this probably feels a bit familiar to a lot of the energy access people, which is entrepreneurism solving a problem. Now, I don't at all want to leave you with the impression that, oh, it's easy, just let these entrepreneurs get on with it, because it's absolutely not. It needs an environment of support. It needs a top-down enabling conditions posed by host communities and policy. It requires international financial donor participation. And one of the key things it really requires is finance for this kind of enterprise. Because, I mean, if you work in energy access, you know this classic stuff, right? It's the last mile. Customs are hard to identify. Data is hard to win. Supply chains are difficult. Distribution is really tough. Banks and local financiers don't trust the technologies, even though they've now been around for quite a while. Take all of that and then magnify it because you're in a humanitarian context in camps or outside camps. It's really, really tough. And so one of the things I really hope through the discussion today is that the energy access community goes, wow, yeah, we thought we were working on this hard, but how do we bring that experience into the humanitarian setting and say, there was innovation we did, right? Through guarantees, through loan funding agreements, through concessionary finance, through blending, through all, all those sorts of innovative financial mechanisms that now we need to apply on steroids into humanitarian settings.
Exactly, instruments like RBFs, reserve-based finance mechanisms, or something like that, are not so familiar and popular in the humanitarian space. That's just not happening.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about also, I mean, that's a question for, I think, the three of you. What is I think we also have to acknowledge a couple of limitations we have from ourselves, right? And one key limitation is the environment that is set by the host community or the host government in terms of, for example, working permits or something like this. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit on this, maybe the three of you.
Yeah, from like displacement perspective, we can say, actually, we have a lot of skilled people and they just need the resources. Regardless, if you can say it's a financial or also sometimes access to this knowledge, access to like a workplace or workspace, allowing them to do something. So now we are talking about the global initiatives everywhere they are willing. So if they are willing, I think it's the time for the states, the governments, everyone to give the access for those people to do something. Also, if we are believing in sustainability, it's the time, like we are talking about the humanitarian support or whatever. If I give them a little food for 6 months or less, it's not sustainable. I think, again, we will go back to this fish and, fisherman and give me the skill and then I will be depend on myself. But in general, in all the projects, I feel like there is a power problem here. With kind of funding and so on. There is a problem of power because they thought maybe, this is our perspective, I'm again talking, is if we have the decision or if we have first direct funding, this is one. Second, if we are sustainable, if we are having the resources that we need, maybe some of those people feel like they are in a danger, then there is no more to have any organization to support because we already now depending on ourselves as a sustainable. So I think also we think about the approach itself. We give them the tools to start, which is like in Egypt, for example, refugees are not allowed to work. So you can stay in the country. We will not give you money because there is no assistance. We will give you nothing, but you can stay. So stay for how? Eat like leaves or what? What kind of staying you give me? We give you the protection. Come on, God, this is not protection. I think there is even like problem in understanding kind of like human rights needs, if we can say. Work, it's really important. And if you work like in Germany, they are allowing for refugees to work, but in different countries are not. If you work, you are misusing the rules, but again, you are not able. If you receive some money, it's again, you have to pay taxes, but there is no tax system, so it's a circle. So I think now we need to think first about the power issue, giving that kind of immediate fund for this kind of community network or localization organization or whatever, because then the money is going half and half and half, like nothing will come. It's not about money. There is a big fund, but how much those people in the grassroots receive? This is the point. So I think, again, needs is like the motto of the innovation. People from the needs, they create their innovative solutions for their lives as well. So again, they will come up with some solution, you never think about it. Again, we need to give them the opportunity to start that and to host them, as you said, support them. There is a great opportunities, there is a great solutions and projects. We just need to give them the space where they can move forward.
Just to build on what Shaz was saying, she gave the great example of Egypt. I would say right to work, right to move, and the presence of cash are the three things that kind of dictate to what extent your humanitarian setting is able to accommodate more market-based energy solutions. And there's great research out there. I think Sarah, refugeerights.org, something like that. They just put out big kind of global map of all refugee hosting countries and lists, gives you the status of those things, and in a kind of de jure and de facto way as well, which is important because often often refugee hosting countries give you the legal right formally to do something, but then in practice, you still have to get 7 different written permissions, or you still have to pay $250 for a work permit or something, which becomes impossible.
Can I add another point as well, which is, and you mentioned it earlier, which is around integrating the planning into a wider structure. So these communities are hosted, and those host nations, not always, but there are plans and strategies for energy. And all the time that the humanitarian settings are considered temporary or not planned for, and are there and therefore not integrated, they're not only hobbling in terms of the national infrastructure and planning, but also in terms of the potential of those enterprises. So it's really interesting. Innocent said to us, he relies on grant funding because the market he's working in, affordability is a massive issue for this product. The grant funding has reduced many of the hurdles. So the innovation, the product determination, the understanding of customers, all of that kind of good stuff. The revenue model is just about washing its face, so allowing him to employ staff, but grant funding remains key. So how the money comes in is really important, and what terms it comes with. And I could talk about that as well, the demands of Western donors in the process, and that that's a whole nother chapter, and how that can be really, really difficult. But one thing on the enterprise side is, if a host community allows the enterprises to blend their enterprise model with host community needs as well, they're reaching a slightly different market that can help blend that. So they can reach the urban communities around them, they can supply products and services, and that can, if you like, cross-subsidize, if we're thinking in those kind of market terms, some of the needs of the displaced peoples in camp. So there is a kind of more holistic, more integrated set of thinking as well, which can be unlocked by the three things that Owen and yourself have flagged.
It's actually a nice segue also to bring Phil in. And when I was visiting my first refugee camp in 2017 in Tanzania, I was blown away by the fact that there is a city of 150,000 people. Obviously, it's not a city; it's a camp. But in our terms, it's a city. 150,000 people is a really lot of is a massive population, and there are 2 different energy worlds in this city, right? There is the as I described earlier, there's the generators that produce electricity to power the water pumping and the health posts and so on, if there is enough. And then on the other hand, the people themselves have nothing or rely on firewood. So I think it comes to your point, how do we come up with holistic city planning in these settings? And Phil has done an amazing work around this topic of identifying actually what the size of the problem is when it comes to these generators. And as I mentioned earlier, we've done a survey last year among the 5 largest UN organizations plus IFC, and we found out they are running 11,000 generators. 11,000. And if we are serious about replacing them, by 2030, which is, or 80% of them is the goal of the UN, we need to replace 4 generators a day over the next years. So, and we haven't really started yet. So it's a massive challenge, but also a massive opportunity because there's someone paying for the diesel already. So it's just a matter of helping them to come up with more sustainable solutions. But Phil, you can explain this much better than I.
I mean, you captured it really well, and it's also worth acknowledging that all of that modeling and the numbers we came out with, $100 million being spent every year on diesel fuel, that was all before the current increase in diesel prices as well. And in part of that discussion as well, like a lot of the supply of diesel generators mainly came from 2 countries, one of which was Russia and one was Ukraine. And then this is coming from there's obviously going to be some supply issues with diesel generators going forwards, which, as someone who's trying to promote renewables, maybe not have that. I think the question of how we replace these generators is probably the biggest opportunity we have to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions in this sector. Like if you consider the average emissions of someone who is displaced or is in a camp or is in an urban situation, you can compare. It's the diesel generators in the camps that are the ones spewing out fumes. Like that's the hugest place where we can attack this from the climate point of view. And we have such political will behind climate change mitigation from host governments, from organizations themselves with their commitments. And now I think they're really looking for opportunities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And if we can use this kind of replacement of diesel generators as the catalyst to make this happen, that's a huge opportunity from both the CO2 point of view and the cost point of view. And of course, you have all the benefits of, if you reduce the costs that are spent on energy, the theory is that those funds could then be spent on other areas of humanitarian programming. But it also means that we do have an opportunity for displaced people themselves. So we talk about how do you replace a diesel generator that's supplying a hospital in the camp, and then you think, okay, well we can do that through solar energy, for example. Like if you were designing a solar system, like I probably don't need to tell the room, the things you would look for are typically a place in a very sunny location that's very reliant on diesel, which is pretty much the most expensive and emitting source of energy you can find. In a very remote location, which is perfect for this kind of installation. But if you're a displaced person who walks into that health center that morning, you probably don't notice the difference if the energy was supplied by diesel or from solar. Like, assuming the energy is there, you're probably not going to notice the difference. Which is why this is where there's a huge opportunity for essentially having these humanitarian agencies systems as anchor clients. So I'm sure like anyone who's worked in energy access knows that like the best thing you can have for a mini grid system is an anchor customer. A reliable customer who's going to front like a reliable use of energy that you can design a system around. And then I won't say the excess energy, but the additional capacity you can add to that kind of system is so much cheaper to supply to the local marketplace. Like you can just run a wire, and to be like it's all very simple. Obviously, it's not. But getting that private sector often into that location is one of the hardest steps. And then once they're there, they have the opportunities open up to supply to displaced people themselves. And that's where you can start to see benefits. We talk about to actually like run businesses or supply households, or any of these good things that we want to provide as humanitarian agencies. So, and there's few examples of this, but I think the most critical thing here is the involvement of the private sector. So both in terms of financing, so for those unfamiliar with humanitarian funding, humanitarian agencies are normally limited to 1-year budget cycles. So on the premise that a lot of these situations are nominally short term, obviously that's often, overwhelmingly not the case. It means that if you don't have a return on investment for something, in a humanitarian situation, it's really difficult to put up that cost. And typically a renewable system, even offsetting the worst, most expensive diesel fuel, will have a payback time of more than 1 year. So that suddenly becomes a really hard argument, unless you have some third actor, some third party, like a business. You can see the opportunity there and can take forward a longer return on investment. And we're talking like 2 or 3 years. This is not like, it's not long. It's really not long. But it's critically longer than 1 year. So bringing in the opportunities for the private sectors to supply energy through like power purchase agreements or some other kind of model with humanitarian agencies is a huge opportunity. So if you can get that private sector into the camp and they have that anchor customer, it means that they can have some other model to supply whatever, displaced people, displaced businesses, you know, and supply energy to them. And it can be a very cost effective and like this is a profitable endeavor. And this isn't, you know, exploitative. It's not like overcharging people for energy. Like in the few examples there are, like there's just been a huge amount of pent-up demand. Like because of that lack of energy, especially for enterprises, especially for businesses, people are very willing to pay that money because it just makes good business sense for them. Like they're the ones that are benefiting from this, like their business become more profitable and the private sector benefits as well. Like it's still profitable to supply it to these customers because they are customers. Like they're paying for a service is very good for, it could be mutually beneficial to all parties, but it requires that catalyst. It requires something to get, you know, often the private sector into that camp, which is why, you know, the kind of projects that have been able to demonstrate that have been so good. And we're still in the process of working out really how that works. Like there's a huge amount of uncertainties around like best kind of business model, depending on location, like how do you set tariffs, things like that, huge amounts of questions. But that's all where the private sector can come in and say, like, you know, here's how we make good business in these situations.
This is for me one of the prime examples where we need, or we can actually showcase already the collaboration with the energy development side. So the power purchase agreements you were talking about, or the leasing agreements, which we now have a model and the document online, open for everyone to access, and which is now also forming the basis for example, the UNHCR's tender process, were developed together with private companies, with energy experts from the development side for the humanitarian. So this is a very clear example where we need this synergies between the two. Think about questions, guys. I'll come back to you in a minute. I want to point out one thing that you just mentioned, Phil. We do see in camps already diesel generators running from people living there, right? What do we do with them if we green the operations?
I mean, it's a really good question because if you are, you know, if you are running a business with a diesel generator and, you know, someone else comes in and sets up a solar mini grid, like they are interfering with your business, and maybe you wouldn't be too happy with that. I think it would be incredibly site specific. You know, it depends a lot on the kind of the local context of that area, but I would say it's a huge opportunity. Because if someone is, you know, if the setup in the camp, for example, is someone runs a diesel generator and they supply power to their local neighborhood, for example, that sounds like the perfect person to talk to in terms of setting up an energy business. Like they know their customers, they know what they're doing already. So if we can make that transition as easy as possible from a diesel generator to, you know, whatever, solar or some other renewables, you know, that seems like the right person to talk to in that camp to get it done. And you know, of course, you'd want to have the protection, like you want to pick winners in these businesses. Like there's lots of like architecture around that to make sure it's fair and equitable, but you know, it's that level of expertise that already exists in a lot of places. Like there are already people who would jump at the opportunity. You know, it sounds like good business, so it sounds like a great opportunity.
And so I agree, and it's difficult because the diesel genset is a sunk cost, and that's the capital that's gone in. And so if someone has invested themselves to supply energy for a local community, that's difficult. The other thing that's really difficult about diesel is it's pretty ubiquitous. So there are very entrenched interests around the supply of that diesel too. And we talk about power. Power around energy sources is huge, and it's insidious in lots of places when it comes to diesel. So I do really, I'm with you, and at the same time think the dynamics around, in particular, diesel supply are very, very complex. And that's something that therefore we have to look to host communities, governments, and the international community to say, if we're going to do substitution, how do we underwrite, or how do we unburden people from some capital costs? How do we quite literally undermine usefully diesel supply chains where they need to be, but not where they still required, because we still require diesel to move food and transportation and a lot of cooling and etc. So it's a very, very difficult thing that is, again, amplified in the humanitarian context. But I do think that really is the role of, you know, people like ourselves to think, right, Have we provide guarantee mechanisms or asset replacement schemes or this kind of thing? Because we've got some of those resources to be able to use.
Yeah, that's going to be a massive challenge for all of us, I think, in the future, because obviously there are people benefiting from the system right now, and often these people benefiting, selling the diesel are part of the conflict.
Yeah.
So we're sourcing this locally, and so we're fueling the conflict.
Yeah,
It's not just diesel as well, of course. Like wood fuel is the
charcoal,
is the big one.
Yeah. Questions? Rob? Oh, sorry, Glea first.
Only because I have to jump off at 12, but yeah, I really enjoyed I'm hearing from all of you, and I just wanted, because several of you touched on the urban issues, given that the majority of displaced people and refugees live in urban settings. I thought I'd just mention the issues that we found in working with the sector in Jordan. Humanitarian agencies need an exit strategy, in the situation. It's not their role. They don't have the authority to continue working in this space, and they're very expensive, but they can play this really useful catalytic role where there is some, shall we say, some goodwill on the part of the municipal authorities or the national state towards improving energy sustainability. And I think that in this sense, it's really worth them understanding that policy context and the governance context, as many of you drawn attention to. We look particularly at public buildings, organizations that are already working in schools and hospitals, and how they might drive energy sustainability forward in those institutions, but also be able to try to make sure that the ownership is in the right place when they pull out, so that that equipment gets maintained in the long term, because maintenance came across as the #1 reason for failure over the long term.
Yeah, I think we all have these pictures in mind of graveyards of stranded assets, solar panels and battery banks and all of this. It's also a common topic in sort of more development space.
Right. Can I add one point as well to Peter's? What was also really interesting, I think if we're talking about the same set of work in Jordan, what we found fascinating by that work was the highlighting of the absolute relevance of energy efficiency. So energy efficiency is lost everywhere, right? No, it's not part of the sexy stone house. But in energy efficiency in Jordan, it's amazing. So, right, the landlord has a property. The displaced person is the tenant, right? So we have that classic split incentive around like who wants to upgrade the structure for energy efficiency, because otherwise there's a diesel genset pumping out outside, to run an AC or the washing machine, whatever it happens to be. Now, an intervention there that can help both sides there. So upgrade the landlord's property for energy efficiency, shading, this kind of thing, better air conditioning, more, et cetera, insulation. Yeah, this benefits both the refugee that brings down the energy bill, so put money back in their pockets, enables a host community with an upgrade of infrastructure, and that's part of that overcoming friction as well in these situations.
If there is a good legal contract.
Yeah, exactly, and it comes down to boring stuff like that. Being an ex-lawyer, I know it's that kind of stuff, but that can unlock tensions and it can unlock cash quite literally for everyone. So I think energy efficiency in urban settings as well has got to be.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. Sorry, just one more point, because I think often we focus on the renewable assets, and if you don't have efficiency, they're losing value. Efficiency should be absolutely the first step. And sometimes the funder wants just to see the glossy panels, on the roofs. And I think we had to work hard to persuade that efficiency was essential in both the cases of housing and schools.
And to your point, this is also for us the core part of the new fund and the new program we're setting up, the decarbonization program. Energy efficiency will be the first thing we will do. And we just want to share one example with you. In Djibouti, we had the opportunity to provide a small grant of 30,000 to WFP to upgrade the air conditions and lighting in their large office in Djibouti. And they're expecting a payback of 7,000 I'm sorry, 17,000 per year, which means it's less than 2 years payback time. So it's a real no-brainer. And we assume this is quite similar in other locations as well. Rob.
Thanks very much. Really enjoyed the discussion. That was fascinating, and I'm always very struck, by the sort of lack of progress on SDG 7 and the pain and distress that causes me in my own work. But I wanted to ask Owen, you mentioned earlier around the pace at which environmental projects didn't sort of catch up with the number of refugees and internally displaced people appearing in the world, through conflict and over the last decade. But I just wondered if you heard in this panel discussion or in Kigali, or if we're doing everything that we can possibly to close the gap as it relates to humanitarian situations, and there's Shana is pointing to demand-led solutions. Listen to us, Is there something more we should be doing on that? And is there something more that we should be doing at a systems level? For instance, is everything based around, say, tariff-based solutions, for instance?
Yeah. I was going to say challenging question, but I'm not sure it is a challenging question, because I think the answer is clearly no, we're not doing enough. I feel like each of our different pieces of the puzzle could be doing more. I mean, if I think about humanitarian organizations, Andrew's speech this morning, inspiring, and there's great people embedded in all of the major humanitarian organizations. But if you look at the facts of it, Andrew's department, it's under him, the energy team within UNHCR is still 2 people, and has been 2 people for the whole time that I've been working on this issue. So we have to ask the questions, are these things being embedded within the kind of core principles of protection as much as they can be within humanitarian organizations? And I think the answer is no. Like, there needs to be more ownership of the agenda from within those organizations. And then you can apply that same logic to all of our different groups. Have we as a research community really got to grips with enough of the key challenges? No, probably not. I don't know. Have we as kind of business developers really shown the models that actually work? Like, if you think about clean cooking, like, where are we in terms of actually demonstrating solutions for clean cooking and scale in refugee camps? Like, essentially nowhere.
What's the role of the donors here?
I mean, we need more finance desperately. We do, and I think maybe some more smart deployment of that finance. I mean, I think probably it's slightly an unusual point for me to make, but as a researcher, I'm always keen to get more data. I want more data. I want to find out more details. But actually, we have to ask ourselves questions in many of these places. Do we have enough data already to actually get down to work? And probably the answer in many places is yes. Like, you don't need to run another huge survey in another 7 camps in X place to know that these people need solutions, and they need them now. And, we need to strike the right balance between where that money is going, understanding the problem, and actually getting things done.
I think, just adding to your question and what you are already mentioned, I think first of all, the humanitarian actors should believe first in refugee or displaced people, that they are willing and skilled, and maybe they can do it. They just need some kind of support. Second, to believe in the green energy and all of that, because now, after our advocating for refugees or for displaced people to be in in general, you know, always like UN and donors would like to work with well-funded like organization and so on. But now they are shift to have more collaboration with RLOs, refugee-led organization, or localization. Like the localization is now the new term in in the humanitarian approach. So we need, I think, to work more, not only on that, again, we have to work on the green energy to be part of the humanitarian support as well. Like if those people don't believe in the green energy as a component, an important component, and for displaced people as so important actors, I think we will not move from there. And now we have to advocate more about that. Like this is one of the rights. It's essential to be in all like humanitarian approach. It's costly at the beginning, but afterwards it's like, as we said, like you have to pay a lot for the solar cells or whatever to maintain it or to start with, but afterwards you will save a lot. So they have to have this kind of mentality. Maybe then they will move forward and like instead of thinking I have only 10 million or whatever, I need to bring like how many food assistant and that's it. This is what I need. It's easy. They have to challenge themselves. They have to go to the hardest way, I think.
Can I come on the point about the rate of change and how we're making progress? I mean, there's kind of two mathematical facts that are kind of facing us. And one is that, you know, as we heard before, the number of displaced people has increased, was it 20 million in the past, you know, small number of years? And also that a lot of these organizational targets are set against baselines for 2020, for example, like the greenhouse gas emissions for 2020 for baseline, you know, for the reductions by 2030. So in the face of that increasing need, like essentially standing still or business as usual is moving backwards, because those emissions or the needs of people, like they're just growing. And if we keep doing things the way they are, like we're just moving backwards rather than moving forward.
I like the question, Rob, and are we doing enough? We can, and I think it would be good to think about the slide earlier. Who is part of this system here? And I think for each partner, you can really see clearly they aren't doing enough. We all are not doing enough. Our colleague Jonathan looked at the UN General Marketplace, which is the big platform for all tender processes in the UN last week, and found out that already still in the last or this year, the big UN agencies bought diesel generators for 15 million US dollar, knowing that these machines will be there for the next 20 years and will consume diesel every month. So clearly here you can see a deficit also within the organizations. But I think also the donor community need to push this topic. If we believe this is an important topic for all of us, then this is part of it. Greening humanitarian assistance should be part of the DNA of the donor community as well. At the same time, the energy organizations, it comes back to the direct funding that Chaza mentioned. How can we almost eliminate the middleman in between and try to support bottom-up organizations more intensively? So I think there's in each of the partner, you can really develop a bunch of homeworks they need to do.
No, just not forget if there is some question virtually, because
Sorry.
sorry.
Can you encourage them? Can you encourage them?
Yeah, I've been trying.
Okay.
But thank you, Chaza. Yeah, hi everyone, Sarah Beck from Practical Action, the previous cloud advisor for the Renewable Energy for Refugee Project. I think that's been evidence-wise for Practical Action now. I just wanted to pick up on the notion of ownership and sustainability and just share an experience from our Rwanda-led learning event back in March, which was the end of the project. So we had a fantastic quote from the head of Refugee Committee who said that we are no longer beneficiaries, we are partners, and to trust us and we'll take this forwards. And I think that just shows you the success of kind of participatory planning, ownership, and kind of that real kind of long-term commitment to change moving forward at camp level. But one thing that was particularly important, which stood out from this story, was the importance to work with the private sector in ways which work for the community, not just NGO to private sector collaboration, but take perhaps out the picture between the community and the private sector. And it all comes down to language. So I remember when we had the panel session and a private sector partner was speaking in English, and this incredible woman from the refugee committee stood up and said, please don't speak in English, this is our project. And I think, you know, that's quite incredible in terms of her willingness to engage, her willingness to take this forwards. And I think it's those simple things that we really need to think about, not simple, but things like language, dynamics, culture, that are essential for inclusion moving forward. So yeah, thank you. And one other thing that I just wanted to share as well was, we led a systems impact assessment on the Renewable Energy for Refugee project, which was looking at systems level change. It's one of the first of its kind to do that type of evaluation. I'm more than happy to share that evaluation more widely. We did a learning brief as well. And one thing that we talked a lot about was no longer talking about exit strategies, but talking about transition strategies. It's just an important term to use. Thanks.
Yeah, I can concur. Like we need systematic change actually. No more individual achievements or whatever. Like we need to change the whole approach, how we work, especially in this, as you said, like there is some people who is already colonizing this section and it's not open up for people. So how we expect that people, our grassroots, will think about something which is never being shared. And there is no classes, for example, nothing in the education about that. I think it's also something we need to work on it, like involve this kind of knowledge in the curriculum about teaching our new generation about that. So maybe this way we will have more easier road to move on. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, if I may also pick up on that, which is there's a kind of simplistic notion of just delivering energy. Like, oh, it takes a bit of money, takes some tech, get it in there. That's never happened anywhere. Like when you're creating, and basically you've never forcibly created energy markets. Humanitarian setting is a new energy market, if you think about it like that. It's in transition. And you need a lot more than just chuck in the kit, chuck in some money, have some, you know, you do need language, you do need participatory structures, you need convenings of the community to talk about, you know, that kind of thing. You know, what do you want? How do you want it to deliver? How do you want to be involved? How will women be involved? How will young people be trained? And that's the sort of thing I think the donor community needs to think much harder about, which is if we are helping to co-design an ecosystem for energy in a setting, what are the other enabling factors that we need? Because nowhere here have we ever done it without platforms for data, without customer research, without structures to talk about what a community needs. Without testing and trialing different technologies and find out what's most appropriate, how do they fit culturally, etc., etc., etc. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's considered soft and in the middle by engineers that are required. You know, so quite literally, when technology is coming in, who is training? You know, is it in schools or does it have to be later? Who can participate? You know, Innocent there with the role of digital technologies coming in. This is crucial now. We have very, very smart technologies that are controlled by computers, and there's no reason that these shouldn't be applied in humanitarian settings as well to optimize and to integrate, etc., etc. So there's a whole, I guess what I'm saying is this, in addition to the big stuff and the big money, there's money for people, for training, and for systems, and for platforms, and whatever. And we need to consider them. So yeah, brilliant what you're saying.
I just want to make one point, and then come to the questions. I think the involvement of private sector is really crucial. This is also something where we can learn from the development space. In the humanitarian sector, the private sector is engaged in a procurement process, and they're really, really good in procuring goods, hence water, whatever, right? But services is extremely difficult, let alone services that are co-created with the private sector. This is almost impossible. And so this is really something where we collectively need to work and learn from the development space, because that's very normal for you guys. I don't know the sequence. Maybe.
If I may just react quickly to what Giles was saying about the sense of the humanitarian energy markets being quite new. I think we also need to be aware of there are markets there and there are some different forms of energy supply happening, just maybe on a more informal level. And it's just a matter of to see how can we complement those actions already, involve those people, and provide them with more opportunities, more resources. It's a matter of, I guess, creating the spaces and also just more direct funding to the people. As you were saying, I think that's really where we should be paying more attention to, instead of thinking we need to come in with something completely new and set up completely new structures. There's loads of things happening. There's so much innovation and entrepreneurial spirits happening in settings, because when people don't have much, you have to come up with cool solutions. And I think if we can be more targeted about supporting those initiatives that are already happening, yeah, that'd be really, really key. And that goes down to when it's about co-designing the technologies. Honestly, with the clean cooking sector, I just feel there's just not been enough like engagement of people when it comes even just to the technology element. And there's so many, there's so much more potential basically for, yeah, again, involving displaced people from every step of the work that we do. And so anyways, I really appreciate all the points you've already made on that topic.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up, sorry, my name is Peter West and I'm Managing Director of Energy for Impact, which actually merged with Mercy Corps back in September. And Cecilia is actually on the line and has been leading a lot of our humanitarian energy work from the Mercy Corps side. Yeah, I just wanted to bring up the topic of carbon finance. It's not been discussed. I think particularly in the area of cooking, it's really, really interesting. So for example, you can have, you know, a very efficient electric stove might cost as much as $100, but through carbon finance, you could get maybe 6 to 7 times the value of that, which would then allow you to sell that stove at a subsidized rate. And some work that Cecilia is doing, working with Basito in Uganda, is looking at carbon finance. There are questions. One thing is about the cost, the upfront cost of the stove, and then of course, is the electricity going to be affordable afterwards? So is it an isolated camp? Is it connected to the main grid, in which case the cost of electricity will be a lot cheaper? This is something that's really interesting. And I just wondered if the panel have know of any examples of kind of innovative, I don't like that word very much, but anyway, innovative carbon finance solutions in a humanitarian setting, either in a camp or in an urban setting. By the way, that's something that at Energy for Impact, we're really, really focusing on the urban side as much as the camp side. Do you have any examples of exciting things that are going on that we can learn from?
So I kind of share your optimism, but I'd probably pass over to Long Seng because she's closer to the ground with the MEX program. So yeah, maybe.
Hi everyone, my name is Long Seng. I'm at the Steer Center at Loughborough University, and we lead the Modern Energy Cooking Services program on behalf of the consortium, and I lead the humanitarian and institutional stream. So we do see a big potential for carbon finance, and we have, of course, been working with yourself on that. I think we have a lot to learn from the development sector more generally on that. So the strengths and weaknesses still stand in a humanitarian setting, and especially on something where biomass is the baseline is especially tricky. So yes, I think
From an affordability perspective, or
from a baseline perspective,
Right.
starting.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think there should be more efforts to be inclusive of displacement settings in carbon finance. I think it is part of a suite of financing solutions that we should be looking at in the humanitarian sector, for, especially for cooking as well.
But then the question for me is, how do we translate this to your organization? Because these organizations do not know about carbon financing, right?
That's it. I just want to say that we still, and that's what I said before, like we don't know that much because we feel like this information is not that much shared with the people who need it. So this is again something we can maybe use in our work, like we can have this information, we can try to share it with our community and see what kind of needs or solutions they have regarding to that. Is it working? Is it not? Where is the problem? Because again, all of this need evaluation. All these kind of ideas need evaluation because we don't know the sufficiently and if it's working or not, where it's failed, where not, why it's not working.
The trick is not to have to do the heavy lifting yourself. The trick is aggregation. So having a system for not rebuilding the wheel every time, but using a standard that's flexible enough to reflect all the different contexts, but reliable and traceable and transparent enough for the people buying the credits to understand what is going on. That is the trick, aggregation.
Yeah.
So we're not even seeing the bigger international kind of cooking companies using that carbon finance to work in camps at the moment, are we? So it's that's one step, and then that's almost the next step, right? Like how do you translate that learning into local groups? And I would say we're not even at that prior step yet.
I think aggregation is a very interesting question because who are the people who are getting these carbon credits? Well, some of the more established cooking companies, I know they're making more of their money. Well, that's the most efficient form of financing is coming through carbon credits, and they know how to do it, and it's actually something that they'll talk about privately and a little bit publicly, but maybe not too much. So then the question is, who should be the aggregator? It could be the cooking companies, it could be a non-profit, it's something we're thinking about. It could be somebody else, but it's someone who's got the interests of the underlying community at heart. And it's probably not a private company in that case. It probably would need to be a non-profit, but most non-profits, ourselves included, we're not experts in carbon credits. So I think it's, how do you pass those benefits to the community?
In fact, it could be interesting to explore this further in the humanitarian space because the sector is dominated by a handful or maybe max 20 organizations that are really, really active and providing certain, the large NGOs, for example, they provide firewood, or the large UN organization that's on. So maybe it is actually easy, relatively easy in the humanitarian space to test this out because you have a certain list of partners.
Who are all actively engaged.
Exactly.
Kind of want to find out the answers.
In many countries. Okay, so we have Ariel first and then Stephen.
Is this a comment?
Exactly, it was a follow-up.
Yeah.
Hi.
Follow-up.
Very quick one, but Stephen Hunt, the FCDO. But just on this question, I know you're talking about cutting out middlemen. There are actually some CAVIC is what I'm thinking about. So Nick Hughes is putting together this kind of platform to try to make it a lot easier for smaller organizations to access carbon finance, because typically it's been you had to make a big investment in getting the funding, and then you don't do that for your company. So I think this is a space where some technology, some innovation will hopefully reduce the barriers to smaller organizations being able to access this kind of money.
That is a point I wanted to make, which was carbon finance is great, and we all think, like here, we sit here thinking, great, it's a great new flow of money. But it's where the burden lies to access that carbon finance and the verification, the monitoring, the reporting, and the structuring, and the having someone with a computer, and if that's pushed down, that is a massive barrier to entry. Yeah. And so, and Stephen, I hear you, and all the time, the kind of technology thing has always been 5-10 years away of, there are going to be ways where we can use, satellite imagery and this, that, and the other, and it never feels we're quite there. And the burden with carbon finance is always pushed down. And these sophisticated instruments are really, so it's different in the humanitarian agency space, I guess, but for enterprises, that's why they don't do them, because it's really difficult and you're plugging into another really complex thing when actually you've got to get on with sales or you've got to get on with, the other bits and bobs. So I think if really part of it is about data solving the problem, part of it's about, IT and AI and all this kind of other stuff. And part of it is just saying, where should the burden lie? And let's make more assumptions about the same as being made at a grassroots level to allow that finance to flow a bit more easily, perhaps, with less burden on the people at the bottom.
The other side of the coin is, by the way, the renewable energy credit systems, right?
Yeah.
So it's just the same thing for electricity. And this is also, I know, Peter Mercico is exploring. And so this is where we can aggregate and use the diesel decarbonization topic to bring in additional revenues. This is something I think we're working together. Are there any comments, direct comments on this topic?
Shah from NGOs Africa. So the beast that is the private sector. I'm coming from quite a sort of ignorant position about the humanitarian sector and development in terms of its implementation. So more on the finance side. So I guess for me, what struck me is that obviously there's a lot of energy and there's lots of intelligence, there's a lot of knowledge in this room and in the sector generally. What I don't understand is why aren't people doing the doing and actually piloting things and actually testing and learning and seeing if things work, implementing partnerships with the private sector, whoever those participants might be, in terms of there will be situations which are a lot easier to deal with in terms of delivering energy in other situations for displaced persons. So, I mean, is there a playbook which says in this situation, this is a sort of, we've got a choice of 3 models that we could deploy. I mean, has the industry got to that position yet? So you can say, look, because then through pilots, the private sector could actually join up and then say, yeah, we can test and learn. And obviously we need to have a bit of de-risking because it is a test and learn situation.
I mean, I guess, so when I started looking at this subject, 2015, yeah, you were talking about a handful of things, really like a handful of energy projects, some briquetting stuff, and, yeah, that was it. I mean, the GPA, if you look, they have now big maps of the various different projects which are happening out there. And, I don't know what we're on at the moment, kind of 50, 60, 70 kind of initiatives in some form or other happening, many of which do have a private sector humanitarian linkage going on. So these things are happening. It's just smaller than it needs to be, and it's more limited than it needs to be, and we're not as joined up as we can be, and people aren't sharing the learnings as well as they could be. So I mean, I'm optimistic about the trajectory of the humanitarian energy sector. We are going like that, but again, the number of people and everything else is meaning that the progress isn't as fast as it can be.
Yeah, from our also perspective as displaced people now, it's really costly for us. Like nowadays is limited resources, the normal one. There is no more tree to cut. We did a lot of fires. We used all of natural resources almost. Flood is here. Pakistan is just experienced the climate change, if we can say. So many things is going on. And I feel like we all understand in a hard way that we need to work towards like green energy or to protect our global, if we can say. So again, from the experience, those people are really now knows that it's important. So more awareness coming to them, even they don't have any like official awareness sessions, but they have it like the hard way. So again, we have the willing within our community. They are trying, but they need, as we said, again, they need resources, not only finance, like skills, knowledge, so many things. And again, together we can do a lot. And we start like small, but the need is calling us, all of us, to do more and more.
And that's almost the best final word. But I think we have one more question, Ariel.
Yeah, so there are actually a couple more, if
Okay.
that's okay, but one that I think connects quite well to what you just shared, Shaza. So this one's from Rutudev from the World Bank, and it's looking and asking, I think, all of us, not just the panelists in this case, if we shouldn't be exploring climate finance, so beyond just the scope of carbon financing, and what that might look like if we pull that into the humanitarian space.
Maybe, should we
Yeah.
have another questions?
Other questions? Yeah, sure. So looking a little bit more specifically at private sector involvement. So just this one's from Jordan, and they are asking, sorry, finding the question, what you, the panelists, believe are the necessary paradigm shifts, or what is the biggest aspect of the paradigm shift that needs to occur in order to really enable
and accelerate the private sector involvement in the space. And beyond perhaps just being, let's say, the anchor of some of the funds coming through.
Okay, then let's say we do the climate question first, and then you have 30 seconds to answer, each of you, the biggest paradigm shift for the private sector. So how do we bring in more climate finance into this topic?
I want to have a crack first. Yes, we need more climate finance. Yes, I think there are avenues that we could pursue, whether that's in carbon credits or whether that's in, I don't know, agreements with governments over deforestation protection or whatever it may be. I feel like there's multiple avenues available for us, but making them concrete, testing them in humanitarian settings, all of these things need to happen as well.
Yeah, I mean, on that subject, so I think it's a perfectly valid question, right? Like, I think we should be trying to take all forms of financing you might have access to. The question around is, you know, how do you verify that? How do you make a system that legitimizes that process to make sure that the benefits that someone is investing in is actually realized? So, and this, like, part of the backbone of our decarbonization project, like, part of that is all about monitoring and being able to say that, you know, we've generated these kilowatt hours and in these places, and that's given these kind of benefits, and bundling projects together so that it makes that burden of, you know, doing the groundwork to get whatever climate financeable projects, you know, you put many together, so it means the relative cost for each of those is lower. I think it would be a huge, you know, additional challenge if that was, you know, as Charles said, like pushing it down to the next level, because it is hard, you know, you're engaging with a different system, and is that worth it from a business point of view? Will depend, but, you know, in the kind of aggregation we've been talking about, we kind of see that's how we can access these different kinds of climate financing, not necessarily just carbon.
And we can start from the place as well that some of the main humanitarian organizations, only some of them are actually registered with the GEF and you know, the big climate financing facilities. So actually, you know, get them all signed up and registered, start actually thinking about developing a pipeline of projects, and then, yeah, as Phil says, we can do that groundwork to make them financeable.
I think that's a very relevant point, and in fact, the funding for this decarbonization work comes from a climate pot in the German government. So it's one avenue we perceive, but it's a good point. Typically, the humanitarian space have a very set sense of donors, right? It's typically the MFA, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or the development ministries who have these funds for the humanitarian activities. They do not necessarily direct UNHCR, IOM, and all the others to the climate people in the same government. So this is also, again, where we need to build the bridges between the various parties and see where it could fit. And again, coming back to our one big plea, can we open existing climate programs, energy programs, development programs for these displacement centers? So this is really something we can all work on in the next couple of years in this program as well. Paradigm shift, 30 seconds each. How do we bring the private sector in?
A win-win situation, like they will do work, the people will benefit, then they will get money according to that, like they will sell their products and they will get money according to that. And with even the like labor market, they are cheaper, like those people, if they learn how to maintain and how to do that, it's cheaper than anyone else, then it will be more affordable for everyone, I think. So just to bring them, show them the data and all the benefits, because they need to see numbers. Those people are really thinking about numbers. Just give examples, good practices where this works somewhere, then they will be convinced, if we can say.
Okay, I'm going to give you a slightly annoyingly complicated answer.
Thanks, Owen.
So, in many of the refugee settings that I've looked at, you have a whole segment of the population which is actually available, which is actually has the cash and the ability to interact with the private sector on its own, you know, with barely any intervention. And so there's a whole set of stuff around, you know, just literally matching the private sector, placing the private sector into these settings and enabling them to do business. That works for a top strata of people in refugee settings. And then one of the really cool things that has come out of working with Practical Action on the renewable energy for refugees stuff is like, actually, how do you define those segments underneath? And then are we creating the right kind of business models that actually enable those with far less money and who are really vulnerable? How do you make the business models work for those people? And so actually articulating some proper, a bit like Shazza was saying, how do you actually show things that work for those segments is I think the really crucial thing.
Yeah.
Wasn't that complicated?
Good. Yeah. It was probably more than 30 seconds.
Yeah, I think in terms of paradigm shifts, I think it would be the normalization of contractual agreements between you and agencies and the private sector. Because I think if you are typically like a relatively small energy access company, as a lot of them are, interacting with a huge international organization is tough. Like there's lots of contractual agreements that make it harder. Responding to those procurement documents is a lot of work, even if you have you have no guarantee you might get it. So I think when that becomes more normalized, and I think there is a lot of political will behind that on the UN side, then I think when that relationship between UN organizations and some private sector companies starts to come to fruition, that will kind of open the door to normalize that and let more come through.
Final words, John.
Okay, so I think two things I'm going to cheat. So start with displaced peoples. I think that's to start with the communities themselves, understand their needs, and then so I'm thinking about embedding principles. So start with the communities, and then it has to be sustainable. Take both of those things and put them through procurement principles, run them through the machines that are all the delivery mechanisms of energy in these circumstances. And if you push the principles through, then other things change. And then in terms of specifically for the private sector, it's not really magic, but we have to create the conditions. You know, the private sector requires catalysis, and that looks like direct funding to blend, to take first loss, to de-risk, because these are risky environments. So there is some good application of catalytic funding to do that, but it's also then innovation. So, you know, the guarantee agreements, etc. So all the kind of stuff that exists that's been experimented a lot with in the energy access world. We now need to think very specifically about humanitarian settings. And I think one of the things there is, very specifically, a humanitarian settings energy fund that really understands the context and then can manage basis points across the different risks that exist on projects because it knows the context really, really well and has started with displaced people. So yeah, a bundle of stuff in there, but for me, it's like drive the principles first.
Thanks a lot. Can I get a round of applause for that? Very much. We're having lunch now, and we will convene at 2 London time. Welcome to the afternoon session. And as you may remember from the agenda, the afternoon will be really about you working and not only listening and asking questions. It's really about co-creating the space here. Two people will introduce the afternoon sessions. First of all, can I get a round of applause for Ariel, who is actually organizing and she will lead us into the afternoon workshop sessions. But before Ariel will take the floor, I'll give the floor to Rob to share some remarks from her side. I guess from here, it's easiest, and the cameras can see you.
Thanks very much and good afternoon, everyone. Really pleased to be here, but in particular, really pleased as representation from Global Refugee Network, and it's been really useful to hear your comments today. So I thank you very much for that. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on where I'm coming from on this from an FCDO point of view. And of course, I'm an energy innovation advisor, so I've got to say something cranky as well, you know, and off the wall. But I've been in FCDO, previously DFID, for about 20 years now, you know, and most of that time as an infrastructure advisor, and most recently looking at energy. And when I started 20 years ago, the issue of humanitarian issues was a very small piece in what we did in DFID at that time. and we were very focused on the MDGs, very focused on sustainable development. And that world of humanitarian, that urgency wasn't properly recognized because we were looking at small numbers, isolated circumstances, Palestinians, a protracted Palestinian situation. But it wasn't a mainstream resonance for us. Roll on a few years and I found myself in Jordan, in Amman, dealing with sort of outfall of the Syrian crisis and trying my best to do sustainable development in 4 years after the Syrian crisis started. It was extremely difficult. I remember sitting around the table with a load of other bilaterals, some working in the humanitarian space, some working in development space, the UN system. Those two worlds, just like Andrew Harper mentioned, those two worlds didn't meet and couldn't sort of work together or transition. This idea of transition was escaping the minds of everyone. Forward again, to 2020 and where we are now with incredibly large numbers, over 100 million members, and an experience that we've had in the last decade of people living within camps. The perception, in the West is, it's a couple of years, it's an emergency. These decisions that we've made, to set up a camp or to provide provisions for urban-based IDPs or whatever, the emergency decisions that have lasted for more than a decade on average. So the one thing that has struck me in all of this, in that experience, is one, our ability or otherwise to engage in this debate properly. But the magnitude and the longevity of the problem is probably the opportunity on which our work continues and can build. So what we found, though, in looking back through the energy sphere, was that much of what we were doing 10 years ago when the energy, on energy in development, is pretty much the same just now. The scale-up activities, the redefining the problem, the extension of the business model, and it's led us to believe just now, prompted as well by recent crises, are we doing everything that we can? Hence the question. It seems incredibly, Andrew talks about dignity and choice, and I'm completely with him on the indignity of being offered energy provision with a fuel that could be used as a lever of war, or could be the war that you may have been running from, or the climate situation that you're running from that's been causing this. Just seems to be an indignity in itself for those that have been offered it. So I think this clean energy transition and pulling adaptation funds to do that is really, really important. The only thing that I would maybe push on a little bit more from where Andrew came from is the urgency is now. The leap has to happen now. The attractiveness of clean energy choice needs to be A, attractive, and B, taken up. I think it could be too slow under current efforts. And in many respects, the dignity element of this, mainstreaming what works and innovations further down the line of what might work, different business models if the UN system did adopt energy as a mainstream sector within the organization's concern. If that happened, what would mainstreaming look like? We have to sort of look at that model seriously. Really enjoyed the discussion about carbon credits. And I wonder if there's a role for end user carbon credits further down the line. I wonder also if we treat energy as a basic service, like we do with water, like we do with education or health, whether we might consider models that are non-tariff based or are have some provision for self-generation, really thinking out of the box. So I promised I'd say something cranky. There it is, okay? Because we don't want to be only achieving the top strata. We do need to make that leap. And in considering those mainstreaming options, we need to think about what we could do if the environment in which we're interacting with the UN system or the way in which we're interacting with IDPs fundamentally changed. So it really is important in these mainstream discussions to understand where, you know, what circumstances would allow new innovation to thrive. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all for being here. It's really a pleasure to see this many people in person. I think especially post-COVID, it's wonderful to physically be in the same space. So I'm just going to briefly introduce the workshop portion of the workshop. We're going to be breaking up into 4 groups. We've somewhat separated you based on some of the core focuses of the different partners. So we've streamlined some of you into those groups, and then others we've randomly allocated based on what we think your interests are. And yeah, essentially we'll be looking at a brainstorming session, focusing on these 3 core topics. So the state of play. So exploring whether you're already working in displacement settings, if you're considering working in displacement settings, how and what that might look like. And then really looking at options for mainstreaming. So a lot of the focus of why we're here today is looking at the broader energy space and how humanitarian settings can take, can really become a core part of whatever activities are already occurring. And so with that, we're really trying to focus again on including displaced people. So obviously all of this is based on that notion. But here we really want to look at the meaningful inclusion. So to also base this off the idea of what the GRN or the Global Refugee-Led Network has really been pushing in terms of the meaningful participation pledge. So ensuring that within all of our activities, whatever they might be, for operating with a community, whether it's a displaced community or not, they're representatives of that community at the forefront of our activities. So that's really kind of what we're looking for there. And then what you think the options for mainstreaming with that vision might be for whatever projects you're involved in or your specific programs. And then, of course, we need a little bit of negativity, right? So we're going to look at what you think the challenges are in moving or working in the humanitarian space. So there definitely are challenges and there are issues, systemic and not. But in identifying those, it also means that we can better mitigate them. And so we're hoping to look at that together and perhaps build on each other and see maybe what someone feeds into there as being a challenge and someone coming and actually observing it in a different way and acknowledging it as an opportunity to move forward. So with these 3 posters, we're going to recommend that you use some Post-it notes, as some great adults would do. And if you could write your name and your organization on the Post-it, and then just respond to these different questions on the posters and however you perceive them in your own way, and discuss this. You'll each have a moderator and a point person in your group. And so they'll maybe be edging you on a little bit in terms of what you can consider. If you're really at a loss, that's also something to reflect on. If you don't know how you could get involved in the humanitarian space, you know, that's content in of itself that I think can fuel some thought. So yeah, please go ahead. And if you see a post-it that you find interesting and you want to respond to, do that also. We can be piling on top of each other. So yeah, yes.
Sorry, just a quick group. Are we meant to be wearing the hat of that particular group when we're answering the questions then? So if I'm on the market?
Yes, but ultimately the learning is going to be brought together in the end. So if you feel you have input that's really insightful, that's not necessarily with that hat, please still raise the point. Yeah, but that's the idea roughly. And then for those who are participating online, we're going to be breaking you into 2 breakout rooms. And so please turn your cameras on when you join those. And yeah, we'll ask each of you to introduce yourselves briefly, etc. Your moderators will walk you through that. And yeah, that's essentially it. So if you see your name here, if you don't see your name here, let me know. And you can also tell me if there's a group that particularly interests you, and we can definitely put you there instead. But perhaps group 1 can move into what I believe is room 7. Yeah, Chrissy, so that's just down the hall and on the left. Then we can have group 2 and 3 in here. There's one that will be here and one that will be at the end there. And then the 4th group, there's another breakout room, which is room 4. 5? Okay, perfect.
Windows.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that fine?
Oh, no, but just follow up.
Okay.
Yeah, 5, I think.
Great. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions.
Who is here?
You don't have to.
Bring it in the other room. Okay.
Mariam.
They'll say Owen, then I'll start speaking.
Thank you all. I hope that was useful. We hope that was good. So just to share some of the insights with the rest of the group, we thought we would have the moderators from each session just share a few key takeaways. So if that's okay, maybe we'll start with group 1 and then go to group 2, group 3, group 4. So moderators, you know who you are.
And although we agreed that Owen would do it.
Yeah, sorry,
I'm
Owen,
now
I was supposed to say you.
Sarah was taking pictures of post-it notes.
And a few notes. I have text you the pictures of it, so you can check it by excellent thing as I'm talking. Okay. Yeah, right, 2 minutes each, right? That's all you. Yeah. Okay, so we discussed loads of different things. In terms of the question 1 about are people mainstreaming already? We had MEX and UCT and ZGen and Chatham House in the room, and the answer for MEX is yes. And we had loads of examples and concrete ideas of how that's been done, including getting data, starting projects, hiring a humanitarian energy research associate to be within the program to actually do some of the work and publish some of the work, and as well mainstreaming within the humanitarian and institutional pillar of MEX and STEER. Ask me afterwards for the acronyms. And UCT, we talked about the programs that are ongoing at the moment. And there were lots of different options. We talked especially about informal settlement program, which is a partnership with Exeter University, and how it would be possible to mainstream either displacement or understanding where people have come from in terms of data and research and doing follow-up interviews in that space. And then the ZGen program, which for those of you that don't know, is the diesel generator disruption thing from Carbon Trust. What's the actual title of it?
Zero emissions.
Zero emissions.
Zero emissions generators.
Apologies for butchering that.
Part of the team program under the new phase.
But that's very new. It's not. It's just starting right now. So we talked about options and different co-learning things. In terms of question 2, talking about what could be done and how mainstreaming could happen, especially in that ZGen program, we thought it might be possible to have a humanitarian project within that. And I guess you guys haven't decided on countries or regions yet, but I think it's pretty likely in whatever countries or regions you decide on, there'll be a sizable displaced population, whether IDP or refugees. And so that's one thing the GPA can support on, is support design of that project. And I think within that program particularly, there's a lot of opportunity for co-learning from what we've already done in the humanitarian institutions on contracting and other things, but also learning from you guys who know a lot about the existing systems in that space. Other things we talked about for more representation of displaced people, building on what GRN were talking about this morning, into hiring displaced people into research programs, and working with them as enumerators and data collectors and researchers, perhaps through the MEX program, for example. And Chatham House had a nice example of hosting a refugee position in their Chatham House Leadership Program Academy. Sorry, I'm just back from a holiday, so I'm not good at remembering the names of things anymore. Which would be a really nice way to bring refugees into the energy and environment discussions at Chatham House, but also
engage people across the broader work of an international organization like Chatham House. On question 3 on challenges, we talked a bit about LPG and the struggle of LPG that we've seen in the humanitarian energy sector in Bangladesh, particularly, both in terms of climate sustainability and that LPG as a fossil fuel, but also in the way that that program is designed. It's not really a sustainable program. The costs of it are enormous and burdensome on UNHCR. And as Andrew mentioned this morning, it might be that they don't have funding for that going forward. We also talked about data scarcity and analyst scarcity, and how programs like ZGen could learn from the existing humanitarian energy knowledge. And we also talked about capacity scarcity in terms of the people to teach and do skills expansion program, like where are the knowledge bases on humanitarian energy and how can those plug directly into the existing and the new programs within the T consortium. I feel that was a pretty poor representation. So Owen, Whitney, Longsen. Anything to add? A nice example that I forgot.
That's great.
Yeah, good summary.
Yeah.
But it was very beautiful, and I wrote down a list of action points that I have to follow up with to connect people. So I feel that was a big part of this session for us. Yeah.
I think I'll do group 2.
Quickly, sorry.
Yeah.
I realized that for the online participants, they're just looking at a television screen. Do you think maybe you could send that one? Yeah. Thank you.
On the state of play, so first of all, in our group, we only had 2 colleagues from the pure T program present, so it wasn't really representative. So we thought, is there actually, if we recognize there's one concrete engagement already from AMI, looking at training and entrepreneurship in displacement settings. So that is already happening. And then we were wondering, and it's something we need to discuss with the T crew, are there any indirect engagements? So are there companies, parts of programs of T already presence in these countries which are highly faced by displacement settings. So that might be something we need to explore a bit further. Then in terms of options for mainstreaming, we found, for example, topics like carbon credits or hydrogen or other of these buzz topics that are floating around is something where we can co-create. There we need solutions that are working in both worlds, and also the diesel generator stuff is a good example for, it doesn't really matter where the diesel generator is, right? If it's powering a refugee camp or any other development area. So this is something where we should work together. One point came up, which was very crucial: storytelling. We need to tell stories from both worlds. What works well in the humanitarian space, something that the colleagues can learn from, and vice versa. And then a big point was also often something which we discussed quite intensively. What do we mean when we say we need to provide choices for the people, choices about energy solutions, about cooking solutions, also about whatever, and what is sustainable in that regard. And then in terms of the third point, issues and opportunities, I would say a few typical problems came up, as we saw already in the challenges: short-term funding, the political or short-term nature of or perceived short-term nature of refugee settings. And then the question how risk averse or not are the partners being active in the space. And then on the opportunity side, I think we both can learn a lot, or both sides can learn a lot about private sector engagement. How do we bring them in? And more importantly, how do we encourage private sector partners that are already happening, that are already active in displacement settings, and how can we support them further and let them grow and expand their businesses and so on, instead of just helicoptering in private partners from outside. I think there's a group. Anything else to add?
Group 3. That'll be me.
Hi everyone, in case you don't know me, I'm Megan and I'm part of the GPA team, started very recently. And I was in group 3. We had quite a diverse group. For the actors who weren't already like key components of the humanitarian energy sector. We had the Energy Saving Trust on the one hand, and then we also had Energize Africa. And we talked about quite a range of things. I'm going to mix up the different topics a little bit, but what did clearly emerge that there is definitely a willingness to engage with the sector and a deep interest in scoping out very specific opportunities. And that, in the case of Energy Saving Trust, for example, is already happening with the potential scale up of the Leia program. But we did talk about how it would be quite good to have very specific project ideas that it sometimes, if you're not in the space, it might seem like the entry points might not always be as clear. And what could play a role in that is the consolidation of the knowledge that is already available in the sector. I think the State of the Sector report has been a big contribution in that regard, but there still needs to be more, again, specific consolidation of the research that is out there to then be able to kind of identify more specific kind of entry points. And we talked about the importance of joint programming and having access to, for people who are new to the sector, to work with organizations that really have access to resources and staff on the ground. And yes, that's really key to move things forward. In terms of like challenges, I think something that emerged that there is definitely a perception, I guess, for people not engaged in the space yet, that humanitarian agencies, particularly large ones, as well as development agencies, can be very slow, very bureaucratic, and therefore quite difficult to work with in terms of the funding opportunities. They're often unflexible and just simply inadequate in terms of the amount. And that therefore, because of these different funding constraints, there tends to be, I guess, the commitments can then be skewed towards meeting the donors' requirements rather than really continuing to reach the people. And that's, I guess, translates to hesitations towards interacting in this space. In terms of mainstreaming and inclusion, I think that was something we talked very much about, and it was good to have Shaza from GRN on our team as well. I think from a private sector perspective, just realizing how very crucial good market research is. To really involve people and asking what people need, what they want, which options they would prefer if there are options, and then beyond that, involving them in design. So Leia does these design challenges. So an idea would be if they're to engage in displacement settings, to have, you know, a similar design challenge in that kind of setting. Capacity building opportunities as well. I think what Sarah mentioned earlier, a quote that we got from a RE4R learning event, how I think the starting point should be considering people as partners and not as beneficiaries. I think that is something that should shape the whole narrative of the sector. And what Shaz also said, I really liked, we should strive to essentially involve displaced communities in the co-design, the co-implementation, and also the co-evaluation of the projects. And I think we do that as much as possible, we'll move forward. So thank you. Team, did you want to add anything else? No? Great, thank you. Group 4.
Go on, Ed. Okay, I'm going to kind of talk across the 3 different areas, really. But we had Carbon Trust in our group, we had Ashton, we had Acumen, and we'd all, to lesser or greater extent, been doing work in this space with, I think, Practical Action doing a great deal more. I think really what we highlighted across all, both state of play and options for mainstreaming and issues and opportunities, was to not consider this as a kind of simple single market that you can apply, the diversity of markets and the need to sort of segment markets and think in those terms, and then connected to that as well, how we need to understand the needs and the politics of host countries and how they play into how we can scale this work. And then another really important point that came up, one of the challenges that came up, was the volatility of working in camps and how really overnight a camp can be deconstructed. And what does that mean for building a market? We talked quite a lot. One of the things we talked about was how we learn from the informal economy Again, in terms of understanding the market, these are different types of market. They have different types of cash exchange, different types of currency that are used. So understanding that local market and how we can build market mechanisms that kind of understand that vernacular economy. We talked a great deal, both in terms of state of play, mainstreaming, and opportunities, how many of the tools that some of us might have developed in the sphere of energy access or agriculture can be reapplied in these tools to be more participative. So whether that's kind of market insight tools, all the work that Carbon Trust were describing that they've done around education and training, all the work that many of us in the sector have done around gender empowerment, how you can reapply those tools into this sector. I think they're really the main things that I drew out of it. I mean, do chip in anybody else from the group. They were the kind of key points.
And they're key points.
Yeah. All right, Chrissy, actually, question. So we had 2 groups online, and they also had some fruitful discussion. So I'm wondering, can we? So just briefly introduce, we have 2 wonderful colleagues, Sadiq and Elif, you can see in the corner, who are currently in Switzerland and the Netherlands respectively. And they're just going to share some of the key insights from their groups. And their groups were looking at overall mainstreaming activities, so not specific to any given key subject area. Yeah, Sadiq, if you want to lead, be our guest.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Perfect. So thanks everyone. Thanks for joining the online group as well. Christina had to leave and she sends her apologies. So I will briefly summarize what we have discussed in the breakout session. So in our group, there was Energy Saving Trust, World Bank SMAP, and Carbon Trust present. So at the state of play, what we discuss is that most of the organizations are working on it. Some of the cool projects they're working on, for example, cooling project, and I also noted low energy inclusive appliances. For mainstreaming, what I heard is basically the suggestions were to include refugees in every level of programming and from starting to the end. Not only refugees, but displaced people. And also conducting needs assessment while including the displaced people in those needs assessment parts, and also have participatory approaches throughout the work. Lots of issues and opportunities were discussed. I will very quickly summarize. Lack of data came up several times, and especially lack of data in context-specific data. And the suggestions were that it could be improved by sharing the lessons learned, sharing the best practices, and sharing the pros and cons of different interventions that took place or are taking place in different places. Also, it was discussed that it's quite important for private companies to learn about those needs assessment and market assessments information to really get into a market or invest in a market or engage in a disbursement settings. Also, it was discussed that wait, I'm looking into some of my notes.
Take your time.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, again, it was discussed that energy systems needs to be discussed or needs to be developed in consultation with the displaced people. And it has to be in many cases, it should be context specific. And if the displaced people are included ahead of time, it will probably work better. And also for private companies, it may also happen that if there are early failures, it may set the stage for the future actions. So they might need financial support to really establish the market, or there might be some necessity in developing de-risking mechanisms for companies to work in these difficult situations. Also, suggestions were that rather than focusing on a standalone solar system, it's better to invest in mini grid so that the access to energy can be expanded to the host communities as well, and it has more potential to work. So I tried to summarize in short. Maybe I've missed some of the key points as well. So if anyone from the team would like to add something, please feel free. Thank you.
Thank you, Sadiq. And if you'd like to share on behalf of your group, unless anyone has some more to add from Sadiq's group.
I think no, so I'll go ahead. Thanks to everyone who was in our discussion group. I think Luke from SE4All had to leave, but other than that, we had SE4All, Shell Foundation, World Bank, and us at GPA Coordination Unit in our breakout room. And for the state of the play, as you might already know, we have organizations that haven't been directly involved in energy access and humanitarian settings programs. But for example, Shell Foundation is supporting energy access companies that have been or are still involved in selling products in those settings. And of course, the corporate side of Shell is working on energy access and refugee camps through their Enter Energy program, but they are exploring the space and there is interest to continue to explore. And for SE4All, which is also working indirectly in this topic, the idea was that SE4All can include refugee and displacement data in their national level integrated energy plans. And they also have a program called Policy and Regulatory Frameworks, which might focus on refugees and displacement communities, of course, depending on the interest and drive from the country. And World Bank, as mentioned before me, will soon produce data of displaced people outside the camps. This includes seasonal workers, economic nomads, and other displaced communities that are in transition. And there was the mention of a possibility of working together with GPA on the numbers once the tool is out. And for the options for mainstreaming topic, SE4All was again highlighting the need of data collection at national level and how we can include displaced communities at that level. And we were lucky to have Joel at that session who provided valuable insights in terms of having displaced communities participating and also leading at different levels and phases of the project development so that we could better understand the context, increase the accountability and ownership of displaced communities and meet their needs in a meaningful and sustainable way. And for the issues and opportunities part, we've identified several barriers, opportunities to accelerate energy access and transition. And the big driver was identified as the enabling environment and national policies, which was of course dependent on the actors that we had in the room who are working at those levels. And a big opportunity was there to identify was that connecting with development partners who have a big influence at the national level. And the issue of lack of data, as previously mentioned in refugee camps, but also difficulty of collecting data of displaced communities living in urban settings was highlighted. And that we need to create a momentum and share big success stories. And here we are hopeful that the Jordan will not be the only example that we are sharing, and maybe with Uganda SERP coming in, we might have bigger, more integrated stories to share. And another thing that was highlighted was that we need to make sure that the organizations are not working in silos. And this highlighted the need for coordination and collaboration across different actors, such as private sector actors, humanitarian organizations, refugees, and other development partners. I think I covered most of what we discussed. If I missed anything, Joel, Jordan, please feel free to add. Rutu, I see that you're here as well, so please feel free to add if I missed anything. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenna.
Hey, thank you. Thank you all. That was a super rich discussion. I think also thanks to the online participants staying on so for long. Can I get a round of applause for the GPA team and the and thank you also to our wonderful hosts. That was really, really, really nice being here. It was, from my perspective, a successful event because I think we were able to showcase what we can bring to the table and what we can learn from the team partners on the other side. More to be done, certainly. As I said earlier to some of you, I have a list of 2 pages of follow-ups, and Sarah has a bunch of follow-ups already, so you will hear from us. And that's a threat. Otherwise, thank you all. And for the final words, I hand over back to Harriet for the closing.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Thomas. I think you've said everything I was going to say. I'll say it again. Actually, we were just discussing, I was really meant to be writing my board papers all today.
Yeah.
So if you never see me again, you'll know why. Honestly, where would I rather be? I just think this is such a brilliant group of people, really grappling with one of the most important issues of our time and grappling with it sort of properly, not just saying, quick, it's an emergency, let's do whatever we can, really, really trying to wrestle with the difficult issues in such an open and collaborative spirit. And so I think it's an absolute privilege, I think, for all of us to have spent this day together and so beautifully facilitated and organized, in particular by Thomas and Ariel. But I would also like to give lots of thanks and credit also to Sarah, to Owen at Chatham House, to Chrissy for helping keep us well fed, to Amir and Shazza, to everybody who helped organize today and make it so rich and fulfilling. And I think there is a responsibility on all of us to make sure that we can look back in 3 years' time and say, look at the shift we've managed to make, that we can look back by 2030 at the end of the decade and really be proud that those step changes that I think you mentioned, Bob, of the progress we have made to have got here, that it's even more transformational by the time we get to the end of the decade. So really, once again then, first off, a round of applause for all those people. Thank you also to all of those who have, it's really hard work being online. Well, we don't know if they were working online or if they were doing their cooking, they've got their Friday night dinner well sorted. But we will miss you all, as we hopefully will in a minute possibly go to the pub. Now, it did say in your program that first you had to have a cup of tea and network, and then you were going to go to the pub. But I think if you would like to, we would be happy either to give you tea and coffee in a place if you want to work, or lead a group to the pub, to Ed's favourite pub, just down the road, the Cask. So I think Ed and Giles, you know, so we're going to leave the piss up. So if you want to join us, please come to that. Or if you want a place to stay and work, that's also lovely. And I hope you enjoyed your lunch, your vegetarian, vegan lunch. But as you know, there is no such thing as a free lunch. So now I'm going to try and send you some tickets to come along. Can you see, Grace, can you hold up that lovely poster?
So we mentioned at the beginning about the Ashton Awards, including, oh, so beautifully modelled, including one on humanitarian energy, which many of you have helped us shape and create. And so we will be announcing the winner of the awards once, the international awards in Nairobi on the 27th of October. So if any of you will be there, please come along and please share with anyone you know who you think would like to come. And then in London on the 2nd of November, and if we're so moving with the times that you can put your phone over that QR code and straight away go through and buy a ticket. I even think you might get an early bird ticket, is that right?
Still in
You're still in there, you're lucky, you're still in there with an early bird ticket if you go on there now. And we would really look forward to seeing many of you there, because it's always a lovely, fun evening to celebrate the amazing things that people are doing around the world and that we all want to get behind. And secondly, we're also, again, hope that you will consider joining the Power Up campaign, looking to see how we can make clean energy a must, including for refugee situations, but also, of course, for all those people who still don't have access to energy. And we're now in the build-up to Egypt, not long to go, and we would love it. Some of you have already signed up, and if you haven't and would be interested, please do, over the pint of beer, talk to Giles or Ed, and we would love it if you would be able to join. So thank you very much again, everyone, for coming here. It's been lovely to have you, and we look forward to the next stages. Thank you, everyone.